Hamburg, 1945. The war is almost over. Berlin is collapsing. The world thinks it has already seen the worst. But just outside this port city, behind barbed wire and brick walls, something happened that almost no one talks about. This was an Auschwitz. There were no gas chambers towering over railway tracks. No infamous gates stamped with lies. Neuengamme was quieter than that. More industrial. More hidden. And that's what made it so deadly. More than 100,000 people passed through this camp system. At least 40,000 never came out. They were worked to death in brick factories, buried in frozen canals, beaten in roll calls that lasted for hours. Children were brought here for medical research. 20 of them were hanged in a school basement just weeks before the war ended, their bodies hidden to erase the evidence. And then, in the final days of the war, thousands of prisoners were loaded onto ships in the Baltic Sea. The ships were bombed. They burned. Men who had survived years of starvation drowned within sight of freedom. When British forces arrived, the camp was empty. The SS had erased it. No dramatic liberation. No cameras capturing skeletal survivors behind gates. Just silence. For decades, Neuengamme barely existed in public memory. But it existed for those who were there. And tonight, we're going to walk through it. From the first prisoners forced to mold bricks in 1938, to the death marches, the children, the ships in flames, and the question that still lingers. How did one of the largest concentration camp systems in northern Germany become one of the least known? This is Neuengamme. And once you see what happened here, the ground is frozen solid. A thin layer of mist clings to the marshland just outside Hamburg, and in the half-light of a winter morning, you can hear the sound before you see it. Boots sinking into mud, chains rattling softly, the low, exhausted breathing of men who have not yet understood where they are. There are only about 100 of them. They step off trucks into a landscape that smells of wet clay and cold river water. In front of them stands an abandoned brickworks. No watchtowers yet. No towering gates that would one day become symbols of horror. Just raw land, crumbling kills, and an unfinished idea. This is December 1938, and this is how Neuengamme begins. It does not begin with gas chambers. It does not begin with mass deportations from across Europe. It begins with an economic calculation. By this point, the Nazi regime has been in power for 5 years. Political opponents have already been imprisoned in camps across Germany. But Neuengamme is different in its purpose. It is not created to disappear people quietly into the countryside. It is created to build something, to manufacture, to expand. High above this muddy ground, in offices far removed from the smell of clay and sweat, the vision is being shaped by one man in particular, Heinrich Himmler. As Reichsfuhrer says, Himmler is not only obsessed with racial ideology. He is obsessed with power, control, and profit. The SS is transforming into an economic empire, and concentration camps are becoming instruments of forced labor. Hamburg, one of Germany's great port cities, is meant to be remade into a monumental Führer city. Massive administrative buildings, grand avenues, stone and brick symbols of eternal Reich. But monumental architecture demands materials. It demands millions of bricks. And bricks demand hands. The site near the small village of Neuengamme, southeast of Hamburg, offers clay deposits, access to waterways, and isolation. Perfect for a labor camp hidden in plain sight. Initially, it is established as a subcamp of Sachsenhausen concentration camp, which already holds political prisoners north of Berlin. Neuengamme is an extension, a satellite, an experiment in turning prisoners directly into industrial assets. The first group of inmates arrives under armed guard. Most are German political prisoners, communists, social democrats, men who oppose the regime or simply fell out of favor. Their heads are shaved, their names replaced with numbers. They are marched through the broken remains of the brick factory and assigned to barracks that are barely insulated against the winter cold. The air inside smells of damp wood and unwashed bodies. Straw mattresses are thin. Windows leak drafts. There is no warmth except what the men can create by pressing against each other at night. The work begins immediately. Before sunrise, whistles cut through the darkness. The prisoners line up for roll call, breath forming pale clouds in the freezing air. Guards shout. Boots strike the frozen ground. Anyone who moves too slowly is struck with a rifle, butt, or a baton. Discipline is established quickly, brutally. They are ordered to rebuild the brickworks. The kills must be repaired. The clay pits reopened. A canal connecting the site to the Elbe River must be dug and deepened so that barges can transport finished bricks directly into Hamburg. This is not symbolic labor. It is exhausting, back-breaking industrial construction. The clay pits are a nightmare. Prisoners wade into thick, sucking mud that pulls at their boots with every step. The smell is sharp and metallic. Water seeps into their clothing. Hands numb from cold must still grip shovels and carts. The clay sticks to skin, to fabric, to everything. It is heavy, always heavy. 12 hours pass. Then 14. Rations are meager. Thin soup, black bread, sometimes a scrap of margarine. Hunger becomes constant. It gnaws at the stomach and fogs the mind. By nightfall, muscles tremble. Men collapse onto their bunks, too exhausted to speak. And this is only the beginning. In 1938, the Nazi camp system is still evolving. The massive extermination centers of occupied Poland do not yet exist. But the blueprint is being drafted in places like this. Camps are being transformed into economic engines under the expanding authority of the SS. Soon, the system will be formalized under the SS main economic and administrative office, turning imprisonment into a calculated business model. Neuengamme is part of that shift. The SS does not see these prisoners as human beings. They are units of labor, replaceable, expandable. If one dies, another can be sent. Already, brutality is routine. Guards patrol with dogs, their breath steaming in the cold. Beatings are delivered for the smallest infractions. A misaligned button, a stumble, a glance held too long. Punishments are public, designed to humiliate and intimidate. Prisoners are forced to stand at attention for hours during roll calls, even as snow settles on their shoulders. There are no gas chambers here. Not yet. But death is present all the same. Men fall into the clay pits and are too weak to climb out. Others collapse from exhaustion while hauling bricks. Medical care is virtually non-existent. Illness spreads quickly in damp barracks. A cough becomes pneumonia. A fever becomes fatal. And still, the project grows. By 1939, Europe is on the brink of war. The invasion of Poland will soon change everything. But here in Neuengamme, expansion is already underway. More barracks are built. The brick production increases. The canal deepens. Barges begin moving materials toward Hamburg's rebuilding plans. The soundscape changes. Where there was once only wind across marshland, there is now constant noise. Shovels scraping, carts creaking, orders shouted in clipped German, the crack of wood against bone. The local civilian population is not blind to this. Villagers see columns of prisoners marching under guard. They hear the distant whistle signaling roll call. Some pretend not to notice. Others rationalize it as necessary labor for the nation's future. The machinery of normalization is already at work. Inside the camp, the hierarchy among prisoners begins to form. Certain inmates are appointed as capos, prisoner overseers granted limited authority by the SS. Some use their position to shield others when possible. Many exploit it to secure better rations and avoid punishment. The system fractures solidarity. It turns survival into competition. In the brickworks, the kills burn hot and constant. The smell of smoke mixes with clay and sweat. Hands crack and bleed from handling rough materials. Fingers split open in the cold. There are no gloves, no rest days. And yet, in official reports, Neuengamme is described as productive, efficient, a model of what forced labor can accomplish. The transformation from subcamp to something larger begins quietly. The SS sees potential here, land to expand, labor to exploit, infrastructure already taking shape. What started with 100 prisoners will not remain small for long. But for the men who arrived in December 1938, the scale of what is coming is unimaginable. They know only the next shift. The next roll call. The next shovel of clay. Some whisper at night about rumors from other camps. About Sachsenhausen. About Dachau. About the growing number of political arrests. They sense that Germany is tightening, becoming more controlled, more unforgiving. But they cannot yet see how Neuengamme will be woven into a continental network of suffering. War is only months away. When it comes, everything will accelerate. Foreign prisoners will begin to arrive. The population will swell beyond the capacity of these crude barracks. New construction will rise. Fences, watchtowers, administrative buildings. The small brickworks project will evolve into one of the largest concentration camp systems in northern Germany. But right now, in this frozen winter of 1938, Neuengamme still feels like a rough, industrial site in the middle of nowhere. The guards laugh as they warm their hands near the kiln fires. Prisoners stumble past them, bent under loads of wet clay. A man coughs violently in the barracks, his breath rattling in the dark. Outside, the canal water reflects the pale winter sky. No one here can yet see the full shape of what this place will become. No one can foresee the thousands who will pass through these gates, the children who will arrive years later, the ships that will burn in the Baltic Sea. But the foundation is being laid, brick by brick. And as 1939 approaches and Europe edges toward catastrophe, Neuengamme stands ready, not as an accident of war, but as a deliberate creation, an experiment in how far forced labor can be pushed, how much a human body can endure before it breaks. The trucks will come again soon, and next time, they will not bring 100 men. They will bring thousands. By the spring of 1940, the sound of bricks striking one another echoes across the yard from dawn until well after dark. What began as a rough labor site is no longer temporary. The fences are reinforced. Watchtowers rise where there was once open marshland. Administrative buildings stand where clay pits once dominated the horizon. Neuengamme is shedding its identity as a mere satellite. It is becoming something permanent. In February 1940, the decision is made. Neuengamme is separated from Sachsenhausen concentration camp. No longer a subordinate outpost, it is granted full status as an independent concentration camp. The command structure changes. New SS officers arrive. Paperwork formalizes what the prisoners already feel in their bones. This place is expanding, and it is not going away. With independence comes ambition. The SS leadership sees Neuengamme as strategically vital. Located near Hamburg, with access to waterways and industrial infrastructure, it can serve as a labor reservoir for the entire northern region of the Reich. Germany is now at war. Poland has fallen. Western Europe will soon follow. And war requires production. It requires ships, weapons, fortifications, transportation networks. It requires hands. And those hands will be shackled. New transports begin to arrive. The rumble of trucks becomes constant. Prisoners from across Germany and newly occupied territories are unloaded at the gates. Their faces are thinner, their eyes wary. Some still carry the disbelief that this will be temporary, that the war will end quickly, that reason will return. But Neuengamme is not temporary. The barracks fill beyond capacity. Wooden bunks are stacked 3 tiers high. Bodies pressed together at night for warmth, but the air inside grows thick and sour. The smell of sweat, damp straw, and sickness lingers in every corner. Windows are small, ventilation poor. Lice spread quickly. Skin itches constantly. Outside, the clay pits expand. The canal project intensifies. Prisoners are forced to widen and deepen the waterway connecting the camp to the Dove Elbe, a branch of the Elbe River. The work is relentless. Men stand knee-deep in cold water for hours, shoveling mud into carts. Their feet remain wet even after they return to the barracks. Trench foot and infections follow. The guards do not slow the pace. Roll call now stretches longer. Hundreds of men stand motionless while SS officers count and recount. If numbers do not match, the entire camp waits, sometimes for hours, until the discrepancy is resolved. In winter, frost forms on eyelashes. In summer, sweat trickles down spines under striped uniforms. The physical suffering is deliberate. It is a method of control. Neuengamme's commandant enforces discipline with cold precision. Punishments escalate. Prisoners accused of sabotage or insubordination are beaten publicly. Some are tied to whipping posts in the yard, forced to endure lash after lash while others are ordered to watch. The sound of leather striking flesh carries across the compound. And yet, within the SS bureaucracy, Neuengamme is praised. The camp becomes integrated into the expanding economic network of the SS, overseen by the SS main economic and administrative office. Camps are no longer merely detention centers. They are production facilities. Their value is measured in output. Bricks per day, cubic meters of earth moved, hours of labor extracted. In reports filed in Berlin, Neuengamme is described as efficient. On the ground, efficiency looks like exhaustion. As Germany pushes westward in 1940, prisoners from occupied countries begin to arrive. Poles, Dutch detainees, French political prisoners. Each transport brings new languages into the barracks, new stories of occupation, new rumors of what is happening beyond the fences. The diversity changes the atmosphere. Prisoners who once shared a common language now struggle to communicate. Tensions rise. Food shortages worsen as numbers grow. The SS exploits divisions whenever possible. Different colored triangles sewn onto uniforms mark categories: political, criminal, Jewish, Jehovah's Witness, a social. The visual coding reinforces hierarchy and isolation. The brickworks operate at full capacity now. Kills roar day and night. Heat radiates outward, contrasting sharply with the damp cold of the clay pits. Prisoners assigned to the kills work in suffocating temperatures, their skin cracked from constant exposure to heat and dust. Others haul finished bricks to storage yards, stacking them with mechanical repetition. The goal remains clear. Hamburg must be transformed. Even as bombs have not yet fallen on the city, the regime dreams of monumental architecture. Neuengamme is expected to supply the materials for this vision. The irony is bitter. Prisoners forced to build the imagined glory of a regime that has stripped them of dignity. Meanwhile, the perimeter grows more secure. Additional barbed wire fencing is installed. Electrified sections are added. Guard towers are equipped with searchlights that sweep the compound after sunset. Dogs patrol the edges. Escape becomes nearly impossible. Still some try. Whispers circulate of attempted breakouts. A prisoner slipping toward the fence under cover of darkness. Another hiding in a cart. Most attempts fail. The consequences are brutal. Recaptured prisoners are beaten severely, sometimes executed as a warning. The message is unmistakable. Neuengamme is not a place you leave. Disease begins to creep through the camp with greater frequency. Overcrowding accelerates its spread. Tuberculosis, dysentery, and respiratory infections move silently from bunk to bunk. The camp infirmary is inadequate, more a holding area than a place of treatment. Weak prisoners are often returned to labor too quickly, only to collapse again. Death records increase, but even death becomes administrative. Bodies are counted, documented, and sent to the crematorium once it becomes operational. Smoke rises more frequently above the camp. At first faint, then constant. The smell of burning flesh drifts across the yard, mixing with brick dust and coal smoke. Some prisoners begin to understand that this place is not just a labor site. It is a system designed to grind them down until nothing remains. And yet, moments of humanity flicker in the darkness. A prisoner shares a crust of bread. Another offers whispered translation for a newcomer who cannot understand orders. Someone hums a melody from home late at night, barely audible above the coughs and snores. These small acts become acts of resistance, fragile but vital. Outside the camp, the war intensifies. Denmark and Norway fall. France collapses. The Reich expands rapidly. With each conquest, more prisoners flow into the camp system. Neuengamme's role within that system solidifies. It is not a temporary experiment anymore. It is a node in a growing network of exploitation. The administrative buildings expand accordingly. Offices process transport lists. Labor assignments are coordinated with industrial partners. Companies request workers for specific projects. The language of contracts and quotas replaces any illusion of humanitarian concern. The prisoners feel the change physically. Work details diversify. Some are sent beyond the immediate brickworks to construction sites connected to military infrastructure. Others assist in expanding the camp itself. Barracks multiply. Storage facilities are built. Guard accommodations improve. The contrast becomes stark. SS quarters are heated. Food is plentiful. Laughter sometimes drifts from their windows in the evening. Just meters away, prisoners shiver on straw mattresses, stomachs hollow, bones aching. By late 1940, Neuengamme holds thousands. The once quiet marshland is now a structured compound of control. Searchlights carve arcs across the night sky. The whistle that signals roll call has become part of the prisoners' internal rhythm. Wake. Line up. Work. Collapse. Repeat. The camp's independence has transformed its scale and its ambition. No longer overshadowed by Sachsenhausen, Neuengamme develops its own administrative identity. It begins to oversee smaller external work detachments, early forms of what will later become an extensive subcamp network. Prisoners are dispatched to nearby industrial sites during the day and return under guard. The reach of Neuengamme is extending outward. For the prisoners, the psychological impact deepens. They realize that survival here is not about waiting for release. It is about enduring an open-ended sentence. The war may last years. Their bodies may not. The brick production increases steadily. Barges move along the canal carrying materials toward Hamburg. From the deck of those barges, the camp can be glimpsed. Fences, smoke, uniform guards. A silent engine powering the Reich's ambitions. But beneath the surface of administrative growth and industrial output, something more insidious is forming. The normalization of suffering. Guards grow accustomed to cruelty. Prisoners grow accustomed to pain. New arrivals quickly learn the rules through observation. Speak only when ordered. Never meet a guard's eyes. Move quickly. Do not fall behind. The rhythm becomes routine. And routine is dangerous. Because routine makes atrocity ordinary. As 1940 draws to a close, the war shows no signs of ending. Germany stands triumphant across much of Europe. The regime's confidence swells. Camps like Neuengamme are no longer provisional. They are pillars of a system that blends ideology, economics, and violence seamlessly. The prisoners do not know what the coming years will bring. They cannot yet foresee the massive influx of Soviet prisoners of war after the invasion of the Soviet Union. They cannot anticipate the scale of subcamps that will soon spread across northern Germany. They cannot imagine the children who will one day be brought here under the guise of medical research. But the structure is in place. The independence granted in 1940 was not merely administrative. It was a declaration of permanence. The smoke above Neuengamme rises thicker now. The fences hum faintly with electricity. The canal glints under the moonlight, calm and indifferent. And inside the barracks, as men lie awake listening to distant guard dogs barking, a quiet realization settles in. This is no longer just a brick factory with prisoners. It is becoming a machine. And machines, once built, do not easily stop. By the time the smoke above Neuengamme becomes a permanent feature of the northern German sky, the faces inside the barbed wire are no longer only German. The camp that began with political prisoners from within the Reich is changing. The languages in the barracks are multiplying. The whispered prayers sound different. The curses, the lullabies, the desperate fragments of memory carried from home, they are no longer uniform. War has widened the gates. After 1940, transports begin arriving from across occupied Europe. Poland first, then the Netherlands, Belgium, France, Norway, Denmark, later from the east. After the invasion of the Soviet Union in 1941, thousands of Soviet prisoners of war are funneled into the expanding concentration camp system. Neuengamme absorbs them. The trucks arrive in waves, engines growling as they pass through the gates. Prisoners step down stiffly, blinking in unfamiliar air. Some are still wearing remnants of civilian clothing. Others already wear striped uniforms transferred from other camps. Guards shout in German. Many of the new arrivals do not understand commands. Confusion is answered with violence. A rifle but to the ribs. A dog lunging a leg. A scream that cuts through the yard and then disappears into silence. Inside the registration building, the process is methodical. Names are recorded, then reduced to numbers. Personal belongings are confiscated. Watches, rings, photographs, letters folded and unfolded 100 times during transport. Heads are shaved. Civilian identity is stripped away with each snip of scissors. The air smells of disinfectant and sweat. It is clinical and dehumanizing. Back in the barracks, the atmosphere shifts. Where once there were primarily German political prisoners, communists, social democrats, trade unionists, now there are men who speak Polish, Dutch, French, later Russian, Ukrainian, Baltic languages. The murmur of conversation becomes a mosaic of sound. In the dim light, gestures replace words when language fails. With diversity comes tension. The SS exploits differences carefully. Uniforms are marked with colored triangles, identifying prisoner categories. Red for political prisoners, green for those labeled criminals, yellow for Jews, purple for Jehovah's Witnesses, black for those the regime deems asocial. These symbols are not mere identifiers. They shape hierarchy within the camp. Green triangles, often common criminals, are sometimes appointed as capos, granted authority over work details. Their loyalty is expected to align with survival, and survival often means brutality toward fellow prisoners. A political prisoner may be beaten not only by a guard but by another inmate trying to secure favor. Trust becomes fragile. For Jewish prisoners, the danger intensifies further. Although Neuengamme is not designed as an extermination center like Auschwitz concentration camp, Jewish inmates face particularly harsh treatment. They are often assigned to the most punishing labor details. Beatings are frequent. Food rations are sometimes even smaller. The discrimination is systematic. In the clay pits, men from different nations shovel side by side, yet their experiences are not identical. A Soviet prisoner of war, captured after Operation Barbarossa, may already have endured starvation and brutal transport conditions before arriving. Many Soviet POWs are skeletal by the time they reach Neuengamme. Their eyes appear sunken, their cheeks hollow. The camp authorities view them with particular contempt. The invasion of the Soviet Union in 1941 unleashes an ideological war of annihilation in the East. Soviet prisoners are considered racially and politically inferior. At Neuengamme, thousands of them are held under conditions so severe that survival becomes almost impossible. They are assigned to the hardest labor, given minimal medical attention, and monitored with suspicion. In the barracks at night, coughing becomes a chorus. Tuberculosis spreads quietly. Dysentery weakens bodies already drained by malnutrition. The smell of sickness mingles with unwashed clothing and damp straw. A man shivers uncontrollably beside another who lies motionless, staring at the ceiling beams. Death becomes common enough that the shock fades, replaced by grim acceptance. Every morning, bodies are discovered in bunks, faces pale, eyes half open. They are carried out during roll call. The line closes in around the empty space, and the count continues. The psychological weight grows heavier with each new transport. 4 French resistance members deported after acts of sabotage. Neuengamme is both punishment and warning. They arrive defiant at times, singing under their breath during transport, clinging to the idea that their sacrifice serves a greater cause. But the daily grind of labor erodes even the strongest resolve. In the brickworks, hands blister. In construction details, backs bend under loads of timber and stone. The rhythm of labor is merciless. 12 hours, sometimes more. A brief break for watery soup. Then back again. The camp population swells into the thousands. Overcrowding worsens. Barracks built for a few hundred now hold double or triple that number. Air grows stale. Lice infest clothing. Sleep becomes fragmented by coughing, by nightmares, by the constant anxiety that a guard will burst through the door. Guards observe the multinational crowd with detached authority. Orders are barked in German. Misunderstandings are punished instantly. Over time, some prisoners learn basic German commands out of necessity. Words like schnell, Achtung, still just standin'. These become survival vocabulary. Yet despite barriers, small networks form. A Polish prisoner shares translation with a French newcomer. A Dutch inmate teaches a German political prisoner a phrase from his language. Food is traded quietly, a crust of bread for a scrap of information. News travels in fragments. The war is shifting. There are rumors of battles in the east, of resistance movements gaining strength. Hope flickers unpredictably. But hope is dangerous here. Punishments escalate as numbers grow. Public hangings are staged to reinforce control. Prisoners are assembled in the yard. Forced to stand as condemned men are led forward. The rope creaks. A body drops. Silence hangs heavy in the air, broken only by the wind brushing against the fence wires. The message is unmistakable. You are replaceable. As 1942 approaches, Neuengamme's role within the broader concentration camp system expands further. It becomes a central camp overseeing smaller external labor detachments. Prisoners are dispatched to nearby industrial sites, shipyards, construction projects. Each new assignment spreads Neuengamme's reach across northern Germany. The diversity of prisoners now reflects the geography of war. Scandinavian detainees appear after resistance activity in Denmark and Norway. Dutch Jews deported from transit camps pass through. Belgian political prisoners arrive with stories of underground newspapers and sabotage. Each brings with them a different accent, a different memory of home, and each is reduced to a number. The camp administration handles the influx with bureaucratic precision. Files grow thicker. Lists lengthen. Efficiency is measured in how quickly new arrivals are processed and assigned to labor. Human beings become inventory. The brutality is not chaotic. It is structured. Inside the infirmary, doctors examine emaciated bodies with minimal interest in healing. Those deemed too weak to work are sometimes marked for transport back to larger camps or left to die slowly. The line between illness and execution blurs. In the yard, a Soviet prisoner collapses during roll call. He does not rise when ordered. A guard strikes him. No movement. 2 inmates are ordered to drag him away. The line tightens. The count resumes. This scene repeats with variations across months. The international character of Neuengamme means that grief speaks in many languages, but grief itself is universal. A French prisoner hears that his brother was executed in Paris. A Polish inmate learns through whispered rumor that his village has been destroyed. News is fragmented and often unreliable, but it feeds despair. Yet resistance persists, subtle and quiet. Some prisoners sabotage production by slowing work just enough to avoid detection. Others share information about safe moments to rest or avoid certain guards. A few manage to maintain hidden diaries or notes, preserving memory in defiance of erasure. But survival remains the central struggle. Food rations are insufficient for the labor demanded. Bodies shrink visibly over weeks. Cheekbones protrude. Uniforms hang loose. The sensation of hunger becomes constant, like a second heartbeat. Men dream of bread, of potatoes, of simple meals long gone. Neuengamme's population continues to grow. By 1943, the camp and its external work details hold tens of thousands over time. The original German political prisoners are now a minority among a vast multinational prisoner community. The SS views this diversity not as a complication, but as a resource. Labor quotas must be met. War production intensifies. Hamburg's industries demand workers. Shipyards, armaments factories, construction sites, all draw from Neuengamme's pool of captives. The camp is no longer just a place of confinement. It is a reservoir of human labor feeding the machinery of war. In the barracks, conversations at night revolve increasingly around endurance. Not liberation, not escape. Endurance. How long can a body survive on these rations? How many more transports will come? Will the war end before we do? Outside the fence, the world is shifting. Bombings increase in German cities. The Eastern Front consumes millions. But inside Neuengamme, time feels suspended. Each day mirrors the last, yet each day drains a little more strength. The original 100 prisoners from December 1938 could not have imagined this transformation. What began as a localized labor project has become a microcosm of occupied Europe, a compressed continent behind barbed wire. The camp hums with forced activity. Bricks are stacked, canals are dug, buildings rise, and with every new arrival, Neuengamme grows not only in size but in complexity. It is no longer defined by a single national identity. It is defined by a system, one that strips nationality, language, profession, and belief down to a single common denominator: prisoner. As the war deepens and Germany's demands increase, Neuengamme stands ready to absorb more. The gates will open again. New transports will roll in. New languages will fill the barracks. And the machine, already in motion, will accelerate. Because soon, the needs of the Reich will extend beyond bricks and canals. Soon, the labor extracted here will feed directly into weapons, ships, and underground factories. And the prisoners, from every corner of Europe, will be pushed even further. The quiet expansion of population is only the beginning. The shift begins before sunrise. A whistle pierces the darkness, and thousands of men jolt awake in unison. There is no gentle transition from sleep to consciousness here. Only command. Only urgency. Boots scrape against wooden floors. Bodies untangle from bunks stacked 3 high. Outside, the sky over Neuengamme is still black, but the camp is already moving. The machine is accelerating. By 1943, Neuengamme is no longer just producing bricks. The war has consumed Europe, and Germany's need for labor has become desperate. Allied bombing raids are intensifying. Industrial sites are damaged, rebuilt, then bombed again. Every destroyed factory demands repair. Every damaged dockyard demands hands. And those hands belong to prisoners. Roll call stretches across the yard. Thousands stand in formation, striped uniforms fluttering in the cold wind blowing in from the Elbe. Faces are gaunt now. The diversity that once felt like a chaotic mosaic has become routine. Poles beside Frenchmen, Dutch beside Soviets, Germans beside Danes. The count is taken, then taken again. A body discovered overnight is dragged forward, placed at the front so the numbers will match. The living are forced to stand next to the dead. Assignments are shouted. Work details move out through the gates in long columns, guarded by armed SS men and barking dogs. Some are sent to the brickworks as always, but many are dispatched farther, into Hamburg itself, into shipyards, construction sites, and factories integrated directly into Germany's war production. Neuengamme has become a reservoir feeding industry. The camp is now fully embedded within the SS economic empire, overseen by the SS main economic and administrative office. Human lives are calculated in hours of output. Reports measure productivity, not survival. Prisoners are leased to private companies under contracts that detail quotas and costs. Profit and punishment are fused. In Hamburg shipyards, prisoners are marched through streets still scarred from Allied bombings. Rubble lines the sidewalks. The smell of smoke lingers in the air days after a raid. Civilians watch as columns of skeletal men shuffle past under guard. Some look away. Others stare openly. The prisoners keep their eyes forward. Inside the massive industrial halls of companies like Blohm and Voss, the scale is overwhelming. Steel beams tower overhead. Sparks fly from welding torches. The clang of metal echoes relentlessly. The noise is constant, disorienting. Prisoners are assigned to haul steel plates, operate heavy machinery, clear debris, and assist in ship construction for the German Navy. They are given minimal instruction. Injuries are frequent. A crushed hand, a sliced palm, a fall from scaffolding. Medical attention is perfunctory at best. If a prisoner cannot work, he is often replaced. The expectation is simple. Output must not slow. Elsewhere, prisoners are sent to armaments factories, producing aircraft components for companies such as Messerschmitt. They labor in confined spaces, sometimes in underground facilities carved into hillsides to protect production from bombing raids. The air underground is stale and heavy with oil and metal dust. Lights flicker. Ventilation is poor. Men cough continuously as they file parts, assemble components, and carry heavy loads through narrow corridors. Back at the main camp, brick production continues, but it is no longer the primary focus. The war has reshaped priorities. Neuengamme's function evolves from architectural ambition to military necessity. The workday often stretches to 14 hours. Rations do not increase. Thin soup ladled into dented tins. A small piece of black bread. Occasionally a scrap of sausage or margarine. The calories are insufficient for the labor demanded. Bodies shrink further. Muscles waste away. Cheekbones become sharp ridges beneath skin stretched tight. Hunger sharpens the senses and dulls the mind at the same time. The smell of food, even imagined, becomes overwhelming. Prisoners dream of kitchens, of bread ovens, of simple potatoes. They wake to the reality of watery broth and empty stomachs. The brutality of guards escalates in proportion to pressure from above. Deadlines loom. Production quotas rise. Any delay is met with suspicion of sabotage. Beatings become more frequent. A prisoner who drops a tool may be struck repeatedly in front of others. If a work detail returns with fewer bricks than expected, punishment can extend to the entire group. Collective responsibility ensures compliance. In the clay pits, men now weakened by years of labor struggle to lift heavy carts. The mud clings to their legs like a living thing. Rain turns the ground into sludge. In winter, the clay freezes hard as stone. In summer, heat radiates off the earth, mixing with the smoke from kilns until the air feels suffocating. Some prisoners begin to collapse more frequently. Exhaustion is visible in the way they walk, shoulders hunched, steps unsteady. When one falls, others hesitate for a split second before helping. Too much delay invites punishment. Survival requires calculation. Compassion must be measured against risk. The crematorium works steadily. Smoke rises more often now. The sweet, sickening smell of burning flesh drifts across the compound, sometimes faint, sometimes unmistakable. Prisoners pretend not to notice, but the scent settles into memory. Neuengamme's population continues to grow as Germany's war expands. After the invasion of the Soviet Union, thousands of Soviet prisoners of war are transferred into the camp system. At Neuengamme, they are assigned to the harshest labor. Many arrive already emaciated. Their uniforms hang loosely on skeletal frames. They speak little German. Communication is minimal. They die at higher rates. The ideology of racial hierarchy intensifies their suffering. Guards treat them with open contempt. Rations are sometimes even smaller. Medical neglect is routine. A fever that might be survivable under different circumstances becomes fatal here. Yet even among this relentless exploitation, small acts of defiance flicker. In factories, prisoners subtly slow production when they can. A misaligned component, a delayed delivery. Nothing obvious enough to provoke immediate execution, but enough to assert a fragment of agency. These acts are dangerous. Discovery can mean torture or death, but the desire to resist, even symbolically, persists. The relationship between Neuengamme and industry deepens. External work detachments multiply. Prisoners are stationed near construction projects building bunkers and defensive installations. Others clear rubble after bombing raids. In Hamburg, after the devastating Allied bombing campaign known as Operation Gomorrah, prisoners are forced to dig through smoldering ruins. The city smells of ash and charred. They uncover bodies from collapsed buildings, civilians and soldiers alike. The irony is stark. Men imprisoned by the regime are now tasked with cleaning up the devastation brought by the regime's war. Their striped uniforms stand out against the gray rubble. The psychological toll deepens. Prisoners witness destruction on a massive scale in Hamburg, then return each evening to the controlled brutality of Neuengamme. There is no refuge. The outside world offers no freedom, only more labor. As Allied bombing intensifies, German authorities move more production underground. This means more prisoners are sent to subterranean sites, where ventilation is poor and daylight non-existent. The air tastes metallic. Dust coats throats and lungs. Coughing becomes constant. Work underground erases any sense of time. Hours blend together in artificial light. When prisoners emerge at dusk, their eyes squint painfully against the fading sun. Back at the camp, roll call waits. Even after grueling shifts outside, prisoners must stand for hours while numbers are verified. Rain soaks through uniforms. Wind cuts through thin fabric. Guards pace along the lines, scanning faces for signs of weakness or defiance. A man sways slightly. A guard notices. A baton strikes his shoulder, snapping him upright. The machine demands stillness. Neuengamme is no longer a remote brickworks. It is a central hub in a sprawling network of forced labor supporting Germany's war effort. Its subcamps begin to expand across northern Germany, embedding prisoners directly within factories and construction sites. The boundaries between camp and industry blur. The SS profits from this arrangement. Companies pay for labor. The SS collects fees. Prisoners receive nothing but survival rations. The economic logic is cold and efficient. Inside the barracks, conversations grow quieter. Exhaustion limits speech. Men lie on their sides, too drained to whisper. Some stare at the ceiling beams, counting cracks to distract themselves from hunger. Others clutch scraps of memory, a wife's face, a child's laughter, a summer field. These memories become lifelines, but they also become painful reminders of distance. Deaths increase steadily. Illness spreads more easily in overcrowded conditions. The infirmary is overwhelmed. Those deemed unfit for work are sometimes transferred elsewhere, their fate uncertain. Rumors circulate of camps in the East where survival rates are even lower. The fear is constant but unspoken. Neuengamme's identity has shifted decisively. It is no longer defined by clay and kills alone. It is defined by output, by quotas, by the relentless extraction of labor from bodies pushed beyond endurance. And the war shows no sign of ending. On the Eastern Front, fighting consumes millions. In Italy, battles rage. In the skies over Germany, Allied bombers appear more frequently. Each new crisis increases the demand for production. Each demand funnels back into camps like Neuengamme. The guards sense the pressure too. As the war turns more uncertain for Germany, discipline within the camp tightens. Executions for alleged sabotage increase. Public punishments become spectacles of intimidation. The SS understands that fear maintains order when hope flickers. The prisoners feel the shift. There is a new edge to the brutality, a hint of desperation beneath authority. In the factory halls, the clang of metal continues. In the clay pits, shovels strike earth. In underground tunnels, sparks fly from welding torches. The machine hums on, fed by exhaustion. Neuengamme has become a cog in a vast industrial apparatus, and the men inside are being worn down, piece by piece. Yet the system's expansion is not finished. More subcamps will open. More women will arrive. Children will be brought under the guise of medical experiments. The machinery of exploitation will spread further than anyone inside these fences can imagine. For now, though, the focus is singular. Work. Work until collapse. Work until death. As smoke rises into the gray northern sky and searchlights sweep across the yard after dark, the transformation is complete. Neuengamme is no longer simply a camp. It is an engine of war, and is only growing stronger. The trucks do not stop at the main gate anymore. They turn off on side roads, into factory courtyards, toward bombed-out warehouses and construction sites miles away from the original brickworks. The name Neuengamme now stretches far beyond the marshland where it began. It follows the prisoners wherever they are sent. What was once a single camp is becoming a network. By 1943 and 1944, the demand for labor in northern Germany has reached a breaking point. Allied bombs fall more frequently over Hamburg, Bremen, and Hanover. Industrial production must continue despite the destruction. German authorities respond by dispersing prisoners into smaller satellite camps, subcamps, positioned directly beside factories, shipyards, armaments plants, and construction projects. Neuengamme becomes the administrative center of this expanding web. At first, the detachments are modest. A few dozen prisoners sent to clear rubble or assist in specific industrial tasks. They return to the main camp each evening. But as the war intensifies, the model shifts. It is more efficient to house prisoners near the work itself, and so wooden barracks are erected beside factories. Barbed wire fences are strung around industrial compounds. By 1944, Neuengamme oversees more than 80 subcamps scattered across northern Germany. 80, each one smaller than the main camp, but together forming a vast system of forced labor. In the subcamps, conditions are often even harsher. Unlike the central compound, where at least some infrastructure has developed over years, many subcamps are improvised. Barracks hastily constructed from thin planks. Leaking roofs, muddy yards, limited sanitation. The smell of damp wood and sewage hangs in the air. Prisoners arrive at these sites after long transport journeys in overcrowded railcars. They step down into unfamiliar industrial landscapes. A munitions plant here, an underground bunker construction site there. Guards line them up, assign numbers, and march them into newly built enclosures. The routine repeats. Wake before dawn. Roll call in the dark. Work until exhaustion. But in these satellite camps, isolation deepens. The subcamps are often located in urban or semi-urban environments. Civilians pass nearby daily. Factory workers employed by German companies move in and out of the same spaces where prisoners labor under guard. The proximity is unsettling. The prisoners are visible, yet invisible at the same time. In some places, civilians avert their eyes. In others, they stare openly at the skeletal figures dragging heavy materials across factory floors. The industrial integration tightens. Companies like Blohm and Voss expand their reliance on prisoner labor. Shipbuilding continues despite bombing damage. Prisoners haul steel plates, clear debris, and assist in assembling naval vessels intended to prolong the war. In armaments plants connected to firms such as Messerschmitt, inmates file components and assemble aircraft parts deep inside protected facilities. The air inside these factories is suffocating. Metal dust floats in shafts of artificial light. The smell of oil and grease clings to skin. Machinery roars so loudly that communication becomes nearly impossible. Guards shout to be heard. Prisoners learn to read gestures, to anticipate orders without words. In some subcamps, prisoners are assigned to underground construction projects, massive bunkers and tunnel systems designed to protect production from Allied bombs. They work with pickaxes and shovels, carving through rock in dimly lit passages. The sound of steel striking stone echoes endlessly. Dust fills lungs. Coughing becomes constant. Ventilation is poor. The air tastes stale and metallic. When a prisoner collapses underground, there is little space to maneuver. Others step around him. Guards demand the line continue moving. Time is measured in output, not in human limits. The fragmentation of the camp system creates new hierarchies. Each subcamp has its own commandant, its own guards, its own rhythm of brutality. Some are slightly less severe, others shockingly violent. In certain locations, capos wield near total authority over work details. In others, SS supervision is direct and relentless. Communication between subcamps is limited. Prisoners transferred from one to another bring stories. Whispers of conditions worse or marginally better. But for most, transfer means uncertainty. The central administration at Neuengamme coordinates it all. Paperwork flows constantly. Lists of names assigned to specific factories. Reports on productivity. Requests from companies for additional laborers. If a subcamp's mortality rate rises too high, replacements are sent. Human lives are replenished like tools worn out from overuse. And replacements are always available. As Germany's territorial control shrinks under Allied advance, deportations from occupied regions intensify. More prisoners are funneled into the concentration camp system. Neuengamme absorbs them, then disperses them outward into its satellite camps. Among these prisoners are in 1944, female subcamps are established under Neuengamme's authority. Women are transferred from camps, such as Ravensbrück concentration camp, and assigned to munitions factories, rubble clearing operations, and industrial assembly lines. Their conditions mirror those of the men. Overcrowded barracks, insufficient food, grueling labor, harassment, and abuse by guards. The sound of machinery replacing any sense of normal time. Many women arrive already weakened by previous imprisonment. In the subcamps, they are pushed to their limits. The war outside grows more chaotic. Bombings intensify. Air raid sirens wail across industrial cities. Sometimes prisoners are forced to continue working during air raids, ordered to remain at their stations, even as explosions shake the ground. In other cases, they are herded into makeshift shelters, not for their safety, but to preserve the labor force. After raids, the work often increases. Prisoners clear rubble from bomb factories so production can resume. They remove debris from collapsed structures, sometimes uncovering bodies of civilian workers. The lines between frontline and home front blur. The war's destruction becomes immediate and tangible. In subcamps located near the coast, prisoners are assigned to build defensive fortifications against anticipated Allied invasion. Concrete bunkers rise along shorelines. Barbed wire stretches across beaches. The irony is stark. Men imprisoned by the regime constructing defenses for that regime's survival. In each subcamp, roll call remains a ritual of control. Even after 12 or 14 hours of labor, prisoners must stand for counts. Rain soaks uniforms. Wind slices through thin fabric. Guards recount numbers repeatedly if totals do not align. Time stretches painfully. Muscles tremble. No one dares move. Hunger deepens everywhere. Food shipments to subcamps are inconsistent. Sometimes rations arrive late or spoiled. Prisoners barter small items for extra crumbs. A scrap of cloth for a bite of bread. A favor for a spoonful of soup. Survival becomes transactional. The death toll rises quietly. Unlike the dramatic scenes of liberation that will later define other camps, the deaths in Neuengamme subcamps are dispersed and less visible. A man collapses at a construction site and is carried away. A woman in a munitions plant grows too weak to stand and disappears after being sent back to the main camp. Records are incomplete. The system absorbs loss without pause. The psychological isolation intensifies. In smaller subcamps, prisoners have limited contact with the broader community of inmates. They may never see the central camp again. They may never know how many others share their fate. The sense of being swallowed by a vast, invisible network weighs heavily. Yet even here, solidarity flickers. In one subcamp, a French prisoner teaches basic phrases to a Polish newcomer so he can understand commands and avoid punishment. In another, a Danish detainee shares news overheard from civilian workers about Allied advances. These fragments of information travel slowly from subcamp to subcamp, forming a tenuous web of hope. But hope remains fragile. The SS administration views the network clinically. Neuengamme's expansion into more than 80 subcamps is not accidental. It is strategic. Dispersal reduces vulnerability to bombing. It maximizes labor efficiency. It integrates concentration camp prisoners directly into the heart of German industry. The boundaries of the camp dissolve into the landscape of war production. By late 1944, the scale is immense. Tens of thousands of prisoners are spread across northern Germany under Neuengamme's authority. The original brickworks still operate, but they are now only one component of a sprawling labor empire. The machine hums across cities and coastlines. Smoke rises from factories where prisoners toil. Concrete fortifications line beaches built by captive hands. Underground tunnels echo with the sound of forced labor. And the main camp remains the nerve center. Trains arrive. Lists are processed. Orders are issued. Guards rotate between sites. The bureaucracy of exploitation runs smoothly, even as Germany's military situation deteriorates. The prisoners sensed the shifting tides of war. Rumors of Allied landings in the west, of Soviet advances in the east. The Reich is shrinking, but the labor demands intensify rather than diminish. As defeat looms, production becomes even more desperate. Subcamps grow overcrowded. Transport between sites becomes chaotic. Prisoners are shuffled rapidly to fill labor gaps. Some are transferred multiple times in a matter of months. Each transfer means new guards, new routines, new uncertainties. The fragmentation of the system mirrors the fragmentation of the war itself. And beneath it all, exhaustion spreads like a shadow. Bodies already weakened by years of deprivation now endure relentless industrial labor in unstable wartime conditions. Illness spreads quickly in cramped subcamp barracks. Medical facilities are minimal. Guards often see sickness as malingering. Death becomes routine, but invisible. There are no grand narratives here, only daily attrition. Neuengamme's transformation into a vast subcamp network marks a new phase in its existence. It is no longer confined by fences. It extends into the industrial arteries of the Reich. It feeds directly into the machinery of war. And yet, as 1945 approaches, cracks begin to show. Bombing raids grow heavier. Supply lines falter. Guards appear more tense. Orders from Berlin become more frantic. The network is immense, but it is also vulnerable. For the prisoners scattered across these 80 subcamps, the future is uncertain. Will the advancing Allies reach them? Will the SS evacuate them? Will they survive long enough to see liberation? The answers are not yet visible, but the machine that expanded outward so relentlessly will soon face its greatest test. Because when collapse comes, it will not come gently. In the basement of a quiet school building in Hamburg, the air is thick and still. It is late April, 1945. The war is collapsing around the Reich. Artillery can be heard in the distance. The regime is unraveling. But inside this dim corridor, beneath classrooms where children once learned to read and write, something else is happening. 20 small pairs of shoes are lined up against a wall. They do not belong in a concentration camp. They do not belong in a war. And yet, their presence is the final, unbearable chapter of a crime that began years earlier inside Neuengamme. Long before the children arrived, Neuengamme had already become a place where the human body was treated as expendable. The expansion into subcamps, the endless forced labor, the smoke rising above crematorium chimneys, all of it had conditioned the system to view prisoners as raw material. Now that logic would be pushed even further. Among the many SS doctors operating within the camp system was a man named Kurt Heissmeyer. Unlike some of his colleagues who worked in larger extermination centers, Heissmeyer was driven not by industrial killing, but by ambition. He wanted academic recognition. He wanted to prove theories about immunity and tuberculosis that he believed could elevate his status within the regime. Neuengamme would provide his laboratory. By 1944, tuberculosis was rampant in the camps. Overcrowding, malnutrition, and poor sanitation made infection almost inevitable. But instead of treating it, Heissmeyer sought to exploit it. He proposed experiments to deliberately infect prisoners in order to observe disease progression and test supposed treatments. The camp administration approved. Adult prisoners were among the first victims. Selected for their physical condition and deemed expendable, they were injected with tuberculosis bacteria or subjected to invasive procedures. Lymph nodes were surgically removed without adequate anesthesia. The smell of antiseptic mixed with sweat and fear in makeshift medical rooms. Instruments clinked against metal trays. Pain was not incidental. It was intrinsic. The prisoners understood that these procedures were not meant to heal them. They were experiments. Their bodies were being used to validate a doctor's career aspirations. But even this was not enough for Heissmeyer. He believed that children would provide clearer, more controlled results, healthier subjects, more reliable data. And so, in November 1944, a transport arrived from Auschwitz concentration camp carrying 20 Jewish children, 10 boys and 10 girls, aged between 5 and 12. They had already endured unimaginable suffering, deported from their homes across occupied Europe, separated from parents, survived selection processes, and now transferred once more under the pretense of medical treatment. When they arrived at Neuengamme, the contrast was jarring. Amid thousands of emaciated adult prisoners, these children were small, bewildered, clutching each other for reassurance. Some still believed they were being taken somewhere safe. A hospital, perhaps. A place where adults in white coats would make them better. Instead, they were brought into an environment designed for exploitation. Heismeyer began infecting them with tuberculosis bacteria. The procedures were invasive and painful. Injections were administered. Lymph nodes were surgically removed. The children developed fevers, swollen glands, coughing fits. They were kept under observation, not to ease their suffering, but to document it. The infirmary rooms where these experiments occurred were silent, except for labored breathing and occasional sobs. Nurses and assistants carried out instructions mechanically. The smell of illness grew stronger as the disease progressed. The children were isolated from the main prisoner population, housed separately, their presence kept quiet. Some adult prisoners assigned to assist in the medical wing witnessed fragments of what was happening. They later described the small faces, the bravery of children trying not to cry, the terror in their eyes when procedures began. In the broader camp, prisoners marched to factories. Subcamps expanded. Allied bombs fell closer to Hamburg. The war's end felt near, but inside Neuengamme, the machinery of cruelty did not slow. As 1945 began, Germany's position deteriorated rapidly. Soviet forces advanced from the east. Allied armies pushed from the west. Cities fell. Supply lines collapsed. The SS leadership grew increasingly anxious about evidence. Documents were destroyed. Files burned. Prisoners who had worked in administrative offices were transferred or executed. The regime understood that accountability might follow defeat. The presence of 20 infected Jewish children in Neuengamme represented a liability. They were living proof of crimes. And so, in April 1945, as British forces approached Hamburg, a decision was made. The children would be moved. They were transported from Neuengamme to a former school building on Bullenhuser Dam in Hamburg. It had been converted into a satellite facility connected to the camp. The classrooms above were empty. The basement below was quiet. The children likely sensed the tension. Guards moved more hurriedly. Voices were sharper. There was no talk of treatment anymore. On the night of April 20th, 1945, the birthday of Adolf Hitler, the final act unfolded. The children were led into the basement. What happened next was methodical. They were given injections of morphine to sedate them, not out of mercy, but to make the process easier. Then, one by one, they were hanged, their small bodies suspended in a cellar beneath a school. For adult prisoners who had assisted in caring for them were also murdered. Several Soviet prisoners were executed as well. The goal was simple: eliminate witnesses. Upstairs, the classrooms remained silent. Outside, the war raged on. The bodies were left hanging for hours before being taken down and transported back toward the Neuengamme crematorium. Smoke would once again rise, carrying with it the final traces of lives that had barely begun. The crime at Bullenhuser Dam was not spontaneous. It was the logical extension of a system that had already normalized dehumanization, a system that treated prisoners as units of labor, as experimental subjects, as disposable obstacles to be erased when inconvenient. Within Neuengamme, news of the children's fate spread slowly among certain prisoner groups. Whispers passed from barrack to barrack. Horror layered upon horror. The knowledge that even children were not spared deepened the sense that there were no limits. The camp itself was beginning to empty. As Allied forces advanced, the SS initiated evacuations. Subcamps were dismantled. Prisoners were marched northward. But even in these final days, as the Reich crumbled, the priority remained concealment. Medical records were destroyed. Equipment was removed. Evidence was burned. Heismeyer would later attempt to resume his career after the war, blending into civilian life for years before being prosecuted in East Germany in the 1960s. His experiments, conducted in the name of science, left scars that could never be erased. For the prisoners still inside Neuengamme in April 1945, the atmosphere was tense and unpredictable. Guards were restless. Orders changed rapidly. Some SS men appeared nervous, others more violent than ever. The sound of distant artillery occasionally drifted into the camp, a reminder that liberation might be near. But liberation would not come in the form many imagined. The children were already dead. Their absence lingered like a shadow over the final days of the camp. The basement at Bullenhuser Dam remained a silent witness to what had occurred. After the war, it would become a memorial site, its walls bearing plaques with the names of the 20 children, names that the regime had tried to erase. Inside Neuengamme, the machine of exploitation was sputtering. Transports were being organized. Prisoners were herded toward evacuation routes. The vast subcamp network began collapsing inward as guards consolidated control. But the medical crimes had revealed something deeper than the brutality of forced labor. They revealed the regime's willingness to sacrifice even the most defenseless in pursuit of ideology and ambition. The smell of smoke above the crematorium grew heavier in those final days as records and bodies were destroyed. The barbed wire fences still stood. The watchtowers still loomed. But the certainty of the system was fracturing. The prisoners sensed it. Some dared to hope. Others feared that the SS would kill them all before surrendering. The children of Bullenhuser Dam would not live to see what came next. And as the British closed in on Hamburg, the final chapter of Neuengamme's story was about to unfold, not in laboratories or factories, but on the roads and the sea. Because the machine, desperate and collapsing, was about to move. The coughing never stops. It begins as a single rasp in the darkness, somewhere near the back wall of the barack. Then another joins it, and another. Within minutes, the sound spreads through the wooden structure like a slow-moving storm. Deep, wet coughs, dry hacking gasps. Men struggling to breathe in air that smells of damp straw, sweat, and decay. It is still night, but no one is really sleeping anymore. By the winter of 1944 and in 1945, Neuengamme has become a place where the body simply cannot keep up. Years of forced labor, starvation, beatings, and disease have hollowed out the men inside it. The vast subcamp network stretches across northern Germany, but the main camp remains packed with thousands, sick, exhausted, and increasingly aware that the war is turning against the Reich. Hunger is constant now. Rations shrink further as Germany's supply lines falter. The watery soup grows thinner. Bread portions become smaller, sometimes cut unevenly in front of prisoners to remind them of their dependence. Fights break out over crumbs. A man accused of stealing food is beaten not just by guards, but sometimes by fellow inmates terrified of collective punishment. The smell of food, when it drifts from SS kitchens, feels almost cruel. In the infirmary, beds are full. Typhus spreads quickly in overcrowded conditions. Lice infest clothing and hair, crawling invisibly beneath collars and seams. Fevered men shiver under thin blankets, teeth chattering even when sweat pours from their foreheads. Some whisper deliriously in their native languages, Polish, French, Russian, Dutch, calling out for mothers, wives, children they have not seen in years. The medical staff is overwhelmed and indifferent. Prisoner doctors and orderlies do what little they can with almost no supplies. A cloth soaked in cold water placed on a burning forehead. A whispered word of comfort. But antibiotics are non-existent. Proper nutrition is impossible. Most treatments are symbolic. Those deemed too weak to work are often marked. A subtle notation. A shift to a different barack. Sometimes transfer back to another camp. For many, it is a death sentence disguised as procedure. Every morning, before the sun rises, roll call still happens. Even the sick are dragged outside. Men barely able to stand lean against one another as they line up in the yard. Frost clings to the ground in winter, turning the earth rigid and unyielding. Wind cuts through striped uniforms as if they are made of paper. Guards walk slowly along the rows, boots crunching against gravel. The counting must be exact. If numbers do not match, The prisoners remain standing. Minutes stretch into hours. Muscles tremble. Some collapse. If a man falls, he may be beaten back to his feet or left where he lies, the line adjusting around his body. Discipline does not relax just because the war is being lost. In fact, it often intensifies. Guards sense the uncertainty creeping closer. Allied bombers roar overhead more frequently. Distant explosions shake the air. News filters in. The Soviets advancing from the east, the Americans crossing the Rhine. The Reich is shrinking. But inside Neuengamme, brutality continues with mechanical consistency. Public punishments become spectacles of control. A prisoner accused of sabotage is brought forward during roll call. The accusation may be true, or it may simply be a convenient example. He is forced to stand before thousands, his face bruised, lips cracked. A noose is prepared. The guards ensure that every prisoner watches. The rope tightens. The body falls. Silence follows, broken only by the creak of the rope swaying in cold air. The message is clear. Even in collapse, the SS retains the power of life and death. The crematorium operates steadily. Smoke rises above the camp more frequently now. Bodies weakened by years of deprivation succumb more quickly to illness and exhaustion. The smell of burning flesh drifts across the yard, sometimes faint, sometimes unmistakable. It mingles with coal smoke and damp earth. Prisoners learn to breathe shallowly when the wind shifts. Inside the barracks, sleep is fragmented. Night is no refuge. Guards sometimes conduct surprise inspections, bursting through doors with flashlights and shouts. Prisoners scramble to attention, hearts racing. Any infraction, a blanket folded incorrectly, a whispered conversation after lights out, can result in beatings. Psychological strain grows heavier. Some prisoners withdraw into silence, staring blankly at walls or ceiling beams. Others cling fiercely to routine, cleaning their tin cup meticulously, folding their blanket with precision, as if order in small things might preserve sanity. The diversity that once defined Neuengamme's population remains, but shared suffering has blurred differences. German political prisoners stand beside French resistance fighters, Soviet POWs beside Dutch Jews. Hunger and disease do not discriminate. Yet vulnerability is uneven. Jewish prisoners often receive harsher treatment. Soviet inmates, already weakened by prior starvation, die at alarming rates. Women in subcamps endure their own forms of deprivation and abuse, laboring in munitions plants or clearing rubble in bomb cities. The entire system is fraying. Subcamps report rising mortality. Transport between sites becomes chaotic as infrastructure collapses. Guards rotate unpredictably. Orders from Berlin grow frantic and contradictory. Inside Neuengamme, rumors circulate constantly. Some say the British are days away. Others whisper that the SS plans to kill all remaining prisoners before retreating. Fear pulses through the barracks at night. No one knows which outcome is more likely. A prisoner from France, his body skeletal but his eyes still sharp, quietly shares news overheard from a civilian worker. Allied troops advancing rapidly. Hope flickers, fragile as a candle in wind. But hope is dangerous here. In moments of despair, some prisoners consider throwing themselves against the electrified fences. Others collapse intentionally, too exhausted to continue. Suicide is both an act of escape and an act of surrender. Most choose endurance, because survival, even by a thread, means the possibility of witnessing the end. The children murdered at Bullenhuser Dam weigh heavily on the conscience of those who know. The story spreads quietly among certain prisoners. It becomes a symbol of the regime's final moral collapse. If children were not spared, what limits remain? And yet, life continues in grim persistence. Prisoners assigned to work details still march out daily. Factories operate at reduced capacity, but do not stop entirely. Concrete is poured for defensive fortifications. Steel is welded for ships that may never sail. The war outside is chaotic and loud. Inside the camp, suffering is slow and methodical. Typhus outbreaks intensify. In early 1945, barracks become quarantine zones in name only. Guards fear infection, but rarely adjust conditions. Prisoners burn with fever, delirious, and shaking, while others step over them to reach roll call. The infirmary cannot contain the numbers. Bodies accumulate more quickly. Some nights, the sound of coughing crescendos into a collective chorus of distress. In the darkness, men whisper prayers in different languages. Catholic murmurs blend with Jewish recitations. Orthodox crosses traced in the air, secular mutterings of defiance. Faith becomes both anchor and torment. As March turns to April, artillery rumblings grow closer. The SS begins to prepare for evacuation. Records are destroyed. Documents burned in hurried bonfires. Prisoners who worked in administrative offices are transferred or executed to eliminate witnesses. The sense of impending movement unsettles everyone. But before the evacuation begins in earnest, daily life remains punishingly unchanged. Roll call still lasts hours. Rations remain insufficient. Beatings continue. The machine does not stop simply because defeat is imminent. The guards' behavior shifts subtly. Some grow more brutal, lashing out in frustration. Others appear distracted, scanning the horizon during work details. A few begin quietly discarding insignia or burning personal papers. The prisoners watch closely. They sense weakness, but they dare not act openly. In a yard, one evening, a Soviet prisoner collapses during roll call. His body convulses briefly, then goes still. Guards glance at him, then continue counting. 2 inmates are ordered to drag him away. No ceremony, no pause. The line closes. This is Neuengamme in its final months before evacuation. Starvation hollowing cheeks and stomachs. Disease moving invisibly through barracks. Executions staged to enforce discipline. Smoke rising daily. And yet, beneath the surface, tension builds. The vast subcamp network is beginning to contract as Allied forces close in. Prisoners from outlying sites are marched back towards central locations or forced into chaotic transports northward. The population shifts unpredictably. The camp feels unstable. Some nights, prisoners lie awake listening not just to coughing, but to distant explosions. The sky occasionally flashes from bombing raids at nearby cities. The air trembles faintly. Liberation feels possible, but so does annihilation. Because the SS has demonstrated, again and again, that it will not hesitate to kill in order to conceal. Inside the barracks, a Polish prisoner whispers to a Dutch companion, "If they move us, it will be worse." He is right. The machinery of daily suffering, starvation, disease, terror, is about to give way to something even more chaotic. The subcamps will be emptied. Columns will form on the roads. Prisoners too weak to walk will be left behind or shot. The coughing that fills the night now is only the prelude, because the next phase will not be confined by fences. It will spill onto frozen roads and into the open countryside. And the question hanging in the air is no longer how long they can survive inside Neuengamme. It is how many will survive what comes next. The yard is silent except for the sound of boots. Not the heavy, confident march of guards during inspections. These steps are slower, measured, final. A small wooden gallows has been erected near the roll call square. The prisoners already know what this means. Word travels fast in a place where whispers are currency. Someone has been accused. Someone has been caught. Or perhaps someone has simply been chosen. By 1944 and in early 1945, Neuengamme is not only a camp of forced labor and disease. It is also a place of deliberate, public execution. A place where death is staged as theater. The prisoners stand in formation, shoulders pressed together, striped uniforms hanging from bodies reduced to bone and sinew. Wind moves through the yard, carrying the faint smell of smoke from the crematorium. No one speaks. No one dares. The condemned man is led forward. Sometimes he is accused of sabotage, a broken tool, a damaged component in a factory shipment. Sometimes he is charged with attempting escape. Other times, the reason is political. Resistance activity discovered in occupied France. Underground communications intercepted in Denmark. Even rumors can be enough. The rope is placed around his neck. He scans the sea of faces: Poles, French, Germans, Soviets, Dutch, and in that moment, he becomes both himself and a warning to all of them. The stool is kicked away. The body jerks once, then hangs still. This is how the SS maintains control. As Germany's military situation deteriorates and Allied forces push closer, discipline inside Neuengamme tightens. The guards understand that fear must outweigh hope. If prisoners sense weakness, if they believe liberation is imminent, they may resist. And resistance cannot be tolerated. So executions increase. They are not random. They are strategic. In some cases, entire groups are punished collectively. If a tool goes missing, if production quotas are not met, if sabotage is suspected in a subcamp factory, a handful of prisoners may be selected arbitrarily and hanged in front of others. The message is simple: survival depends on silence. But even in silence, resistance exists. It does not look like open rebellion. There are no uprisings storming the watchtowers. Instead, resistance at Neuengamme is quiet, fragile, and constant. In the factories of Hamburg, where prisoners labor under companies like Blom and Voss, small acts of defiance slip into daily routine. A bolt tightens slightly off alignment. A delay in assembling a component destined for a naval vessel. A miscalibrated measurement that cannot easily be traced. These acts are risky. Discovery can mean torture, execution, or transfer to a more brutal subcamp. Yet prisoners persist. Because even the smallest act of disruption feels like reclaiming a fragment of agency in a system designed to erase it. In the underground production sites supplying aircraft components for firms such as Messerschmitt, men work in suffocating tunnels where dust fills lungs and artificial light erases day and night. There, too, sabotage occurs, subtle enough to avoid immediate suspicion, significant enough to slow output. Guards respond with suspicion. Work details are inspected more frequently. Searches become harsher. Prisoners are forced to strip in the cold while guards examine clothing seams for hidden notes or contraband. And yet, information still circulates. News of Allied advances spreads from civilian workers to prisoners. A whispered phrase overheard near a loading dock. A scrap of newspaper glimpsed in a trash bin. The war is turning decisively against Germany. Inside Neuengamme, this knowledge is dangerous. Hope grows in proportion to the regime's desperation. Among the diverse prisoner population, French resistance members, Dutch political detainees, Polish deportees, Soviet POWs, informal networks form. Men exchange updates about the front lines. They debate how long the SS can maintain control. But any sign of organized communication risks lethal consequences. In one subcamp, a small resistance cell is uncovered. Hidden notes. Plans to sabotage machinery more aggressively. The response is immediate and brutal. Arrests. Interrogations. Beatings that echo through thin wooden walls. Several men are transferred back to the main camp and publicly executed. The rope creaks again. The SS intends to crush not just bodies, but morale. Yet morale proves stubborn. Even in the face of public hangings, prisoners maintain rituals of remembrance. A brief nod when passing the spot where someone died. A whispered prayer in a language the guards do not understand. These gestures are tiny, almost invisible, but they sustain identity. The subcamp network under Neuengamme's authority continues to function despite escalating chaos outside. More than 80 satellite camps operate across northern Germany. Each one has its own pattern of discipline, its own balance between industrial production and punishment. In some, executions are rare but starvation rampant. In others, discipline is maintained through frequent violence. As Allied bombing intensifies, prisoners in urban subcamps experience the war directly. Sirens wail. Explosions shake factory walls. Sometimes prisoners are ordered to continue working during air raids. Other times, they are herded into inadequate shelters. When bombs strike close to subcamps, chaos erupts. Dust clouds fill the air. Machinery crashes. Guards shout conflicting orders. In these moments, a flicker of possibility appears. Escape amid confusion. A few attempt it. Most are recaptured quickly, exhausted and disoriented in unfamiliar streets. Recapture often means execution. Back in the main camp, the atmosphere grows increasingly tense as 1945 advances. Guards receive contradictory instructions from higher command. Some speak openly about the approaching British forces. Others insist that the Reich will hold. The prisoners listen carefully. They notice the small changes. Guards burning documents. Officers moving valuables into crates. Increased patrols at night. Fear of uprising grows within the SS ranks. To counter it, punishments become even more visible. One afternoon, a group of prisoners accused of planning sabotage in a factory are assembled in the yard. They are forced to kneel. The guards read out charges in clipped German. Few prisoners understand the full speech, but the tone is unmistakable. Shots ring out. Bodies fall forward into the dirt. The execution is not hidden. It is meant to be witnessed. And yet, each execution strengthens resolve in unexpected ways. The prisoners see clearly now that the regime is afraid. Afraid of losing control. Afraid of evidence surviving. Afraid of retribution. This awareness changes the psychological landscape. The fear remains, constant and sharp, but it is joined by a quiet, growing certainty that the system cannot last much longer. In the barracks at night, conversations shift from endurance to speculation. What will happen when the British arrive? Will they open the gates immediately? Will the SS attempt to kill the remaining prisoners first? Rumors spread of camps in the east where mass executions occurred before liberation. No one knows which scenario awaits Neuengamme. The executions continue into early 1945. Some are targeted killings of resistance members from occupied countries. French prisoners who had organized underground networks. Dutch detainees accused of distributing information. Danish resistors captured during sabotage operations. Neuengamme becomes a site of reprisal. The SS understands that eliminating resistance leaders weakens morale across national lines. So they target those perceived as organizers. But resistance adapts. Leadership becomes decentralized. Information passes through multiple channels. No single individual holds enough knowledge to expose the entire network. In a camp defined by starvation and disease, this persistence is remarkable. Even Soviet prisoners, among the most heavily targeted and malnourished, participate in acts of quiet solidarity. Sharing food, translating orders, helping weaker comrades stand during roll call. These gestures do not overturn the system, but they prevent it from completely annihilating dignity. The children murdered at Bullenhuser Dam remain a haunting undercurrent. For those who know the details, the executions in the yard feel connected, part of the same logic of erasure. If the regime is willing to hang children in a basement, it will not hesitate to hang adults in a yard. As the weeks pass and artillery sounds drawn nearer, the SS begins planning evacuation. But before movement begins, they intensify efforts to eliminate evidence. Prisoners involved in record-keeping are transferred. Some disappear. The crematorium operates at higher capacity, not only for those dying of illness, but for those executed to prevent testimony. Smoke rises thick against a gray sky. The guards' behavior grows more erratic. Some are visibly nervous. Others become more violent, as if lashing out against the inevitability of defeat. A guard who once administered routine beatings now strikes with uncontrolled rage. Another avoids eye contact, speaking less than before. The prisoners sense both desperation and fragility. In one barrack, a French prisoner whispers, "They are afraid." It is not spoken loudly, but the sentiment spreads. Fear changes the balance of power subtly. The SS still holds weapons, still controls food, still commands movement. But the psychological certainty that sustained them for years is cracking. The executions that once projected dominance now hint at insecurity. Still, no open revolt occurs. The prisoners are too weak, too malnourished, too aware of consequences. They conserve energy, for survival. Because the final act is approaching, the subcamps will not remain intact much longer. The front lines are moving too quickly. Guards are receiving orders to clear facilities, to move prisoners northward, to prevent liberation scenes that could be photographed and broadcast. The nooses in the yard sway gently in the wind. The machine of punishment has done its work. But soon, the fences will no longer define the boundaries of suffering. The executions inside Neuengamme were meant to silence resistance. Instead, they have hardened it. And as Allied forces close in, the regime will attempt one final act of control, not within the yard, but on the roads and at sea, because the prisoners are about to be moved, and what waits beyond the gates will be even more chaotic than the gallows. The factory floor vibrates with the rhythm of machinery, but the faces bent over the work tables are different now. They are smaller, thinner, and in many cases, framed by strands of hair hastily cut away under the harsh light of registration rooms. By 1944, as the Reich strains under the weight of a collapsing war, Neuengamme's vast subcamp network absorbs a new and increasingly visible presence: women. They arrive in transports from across occupied Europe, many transferred from Ravensbrück concentration camp, the primary women's camp north of Berlin. Some are Jewish. Others are political prisoners. Some were arrested for resistance activity. Some for nothing more than their identity. When they step down from the rail cars or trucks in the yards of Neuengamme subcamps, the atmosphere is already tense. They are not brought into the main men's compound in large numbers. Instead, they are dispersed into newly established female subcamps attached directly to factories, munitions plants, and industrial sites in and around Hamburg and other northern cities. The system adapts quickly. Barracks are erected beside armaments factories. Barbed wire fences encircle industrial compounds. Guard units, often including female overseers transferred from Ravensbrück, assume control. The women are issued striped uniforms, often ill-fitting. Wooden clogs scrape against concrete floors as they are marched to work details before dawn. Their labor is no less brutal than that of the men. In munitions plants, they assemble shells and components destined for battlefields where the Reich is losing ground daily. The air inside these factories is thick with chemical fumes and metallic dust. Machines hum relentlessly. Sparks fly in bursts of white light. The women work with hands already weakened by prior imprisonment. Some cough constantly, lungs irritated by dust. Others struggle to lift heavy materials, their bodies reduced by months or years of malnutrition. Guards patrol between rows of workers, watching for mistakes. A drop component invites a slap or a shout. A slowed pace can result in hours of standing punishment after the shift ends. Outside the factories, Allied bombing raids intensify. Sirens wail over Hamburg and surrounding cities. Sometimes the women are forced to continue working as explosions shake the walls. Windows rattle. Dust falls from ceilings. The ground trembles. Other times, they are herded into makeshift shelters, overcrowded, poorly ventilated spaces that offer little protection. After raids, their labor increases. They clear rubble from bomb buildings. They carry bricks and twisted steel away from collapsed walls. The irony is bitter. Prisoners forced to repair the destruction caused by the regime's war. The smell of smoke lingers in the air long after fires are extinguished. Within the female subcamps, conditions mirror those endured by the men. Overcrowded barracks, thin straw mattresses, lice infestations, food rations barely sufficient to sustain life. Watery soup ladled into tin bowls. A small piece of bread, sometimes moldy. Hunger becomes constant. The women develop coping mechanisms similar to those of male prisoners. They divide bread carefully, measuring portions with intense focus. They whisper recipes from memory, recounting meals from childhood kitchens in France, Poland, the Netherlands. Memory becomes nourishment of a different kind. Harassment and abuse are persistent threats. Some guards exploit their authority cruelly. Verbal humiliation is routine. Physical violence erupts unpredictably. The constant fear of selection for punishment or transfer hangs in the air. Yet solidarity grows. In the barracks at night, women share stories of home. A Belgian detainee describes the canals of her city. A Danish prisoner recalls the sound of church bells. A Jewish woman speaks quietly of a family she has not seen since deportation. Their voices are soft, but their resilience is firm. The female subcamps under Neuengamme's authority expand rapidly. By late 1944, thousands of women are dispersed across these satellite sites. Each subcamp operates under the broader administration of Neuengamme, yet conditions vary depending on location and command. In some, labor focuses on munitions assembly. In others, textile production or repair of military uniforms. Some are assigned to underground construction projects, hauling materials through tunnels carved to shield production from bombs. The physical strain is immense. Pregnant women struggle silently. Menstrual cycles cease under starvation. Illness spreads quickly in close quarters. The infirmaries, if they exist, are under-equipped and overwhelmed. Death remains constant. A woman collapses at her workstation and is carried away. Another succumbs to typhus after days of fever. Their absence is noted only in administrative ledgers. Replacements arrive. The machinery of exploitation does not slow. In mixed industrial sites, male and female prisoners sometimes catch glimpses of one another across factory floors or during transport between barracks and work areas. Eye contact becomes a silent exchange of recognition. Shared suffering binds them beyond gender. But direct communication is limited and risky. The guards are vigilant. As Germany's defeat becomes increasingly apparent, the SS tightens discipline in subcamps. Rumors of Allied advances circulate. The women hear whispers from civilian workers. The British are nearing the Rhine, the Americans advancing from the west. Hope flickers, but fear tempers it. Because as the regime collapses, unpredictability grows. The women understand that they are vulnerable. In early 1945, evacuations begin in some subcamps. Orders arrive to consolidate prisoners. Trains are arranged hastily. Columns form on roads under gray skies. Before evacuation fully begins, daily life continues its brutal rhythm. Roll calls in freezing wind. Hours standing still while numbers are counted and recounted. A woman too weak to stand is propped up by others. If she falls, she risks being beaten or left behind. Some guards appear more agitated now. They burn documents, destroy records, remove identifying insignia from uniforms. The sense of impending collapse hangs heavy. In one subcamp, a group of women attempt subtle sabotage, misaligning munitions components. The error is discovered. Punishments follow swiftly. The accused are beaten, then transferred under guard. Their fate uncertain. The executions that once dominated the main camp yard echo here in quieter forms. Punishments in subcamps may not always involve public hangings, but they involve brutality nonetheless. Solitary confinement in dark, damp rooms. Reduced rations. Transfers to harsher sites. The psychological strain intensifies. Women who have endured arrest, deportation, transport, and forced labor now confront the uncertainty of what the final weeks of war will bring. Liberation is near, but so is chaos. In the barracks, one night, a Polish prisoner whispers, "They will not let us be found." The fear is not unfounded. Reports from other camps suggest that as Allied forces approach, the SS often evacuates prisoners on forced marches, sometimes with catastrophic consequences. The female subcamps under Neuengamme's authority are not exempt. Transports begin to move more frequently. Women are marched to railheads or loaded into freight cars under guard. Some are sent back toward the main camp. Others are moved northward. The roads are muddy. The air cold. Many are already too weak to endure long journeys. Those who stumble are shouted at, sometimes beaten, occasionally shot. The evacuation process is chaotic. Guards receive conflicting orders. Trains are delayed by bomb damage. Columns of prisoners move unpredictably through towns and countryside, drawing stares from civilians who have grown accustomed to their presence, yet remain detached. Back at Neuengamme's central administration, coordination becomes frantic. The vast network of more than 80 subcamps begins collapsing inward. Prisoners are consolidated, records destroyed, evidence erased. For the women who survived months of forced labor in munitions plants and rubble-strewn cities, the uncertainty is suffocating. They have endured hunger, disease, humiliation, and relentless work. Now they face movement into an unknown final phase. The children murdered at Bullenhuser Dam remain a haunting undercurrent in these final weeks. The knowledge that even the most vulnerable were killed rather than liberated reinforces the fear that the regime may choose annihilation over surrender. In one subcamp, as evacuation orders are read aloud, a French woman grips the hand of a Dutch companion. They exchange no words. They do not need to. They understand that survival now depends not only on endurance, but on chance. The female presence within Neuengamme's system underscores a broader truth about the camp's evolution. What began as a brickwork staffed by 100 male political prisoners has become a sprawling network consuming men and women from across Europe. The machinery of forced labor has expanded indiscriminately, absorbing all categories deemed expendable by the regime. And as 1945 advances, that machinery is faltering. Bombing intensifies. Allied troops draw nearer. Guards grow increasingly nervous. Some desert their posts. Others double down on cruelty. The women feel the tension in every command, every roll call, every shift in tone. Soon, they will be moved again. And what awaits on the roads, and eventually on the Baltic Sea, will test survival in ways even the subcamps have not. For now, the factory floor still hums. The clatter of machinery continues. But the system that bound these women to their work is unraveling. And when it breaks, it will not do so gently. It will drag them into its final, desperate convulsion. The sky over Hamburg turns orange before anyone understands what is happening. It is July, 1943. Night. The air is thick and heavy, pressing down on the city like a warning. Then the sirens begin. A long, rising wail that slices through the darkness. Inside Neuengamme, prisoners lift their heads in the barracks. Some have heard air raid sirens before, but this time feels different. The sound does not fade quickly. It builds. It multiplies. Then comes the distant thunder. Bombers. Hundreds of them. The first explosions ripple across the horizon. Windows in the camp tremble. A low vibration moves through the ground, subtle at first, then undeniable. Guards shout orders. Searchlights sweep across the sky, white beams cutting through blackness in frantic arcs. Above the city of Hamburg, Allied aircraft unleash what will become one of the most devastating bombing campaigns of the war, Operation Gamara. From inside the camp, prisoners can see the glow. A red-orange pulse spreading across the sky, reflecting off low clouds. Smoke rises in thick columns, illuminated by fire from below. The smell of burning drifts on the wind, faint at first, then sharp and unmistakable. For a moment, something shifts in the yard. Guards glance nervously toward the horizon. Their confidence falters under the distant roar of engines and detonations. The prisoners stand still, unsure whether to feel fear or something else. Hope. Over the following nights, the bombing intensifies. The firestorm that engulfs Hamburg becomes catastrophic. Entire neighborhoods collapse. Temperatures rise so high that air itself seems to ignite. Winds generated by the flames pull oxygen inward with violent force. Civilians flee through streets turned into furnaces. Inside Neuengamme, the prisoners watch the sky burn. The regime that has imprisoned them is under attack. The city that demanded bricks and labor from their broken bodies is crumbling. But the bombing does not bring immediate relief. Instead, it brings more work. Within days of the heaviest raids, prisoners are marched into Hamburg under guard. Columns of striped figures move through roads layered with ash and shattered glass. Buildings stand hollowed, walls blackened. The smell of smoke is constant, mixed with something heavier, the scent of death. They are ordered to clear rubble, to dig through collapsed structures, to retrieve bodies. The irony is cruel. Prisoners of the regime now tasked with cleaning up the destruction inflicted by its enemies. They work in silence, hands blistered from lifting bricks and twisted steel. Dust fills their lungs. Every breath tastes like soot. Sometimes they uncover civilians, men, women, children, buried beneath debris. The faces are gray with ash. The air is thick with grief, even if no one speaks it aloud. The prisoners are not permitted to pause. They are not permitted to express sympathy. They are labor. Operation Gemara changes everything. Hamburg's industrial capacity is severely damaged. Shipyards, factories, infrastructure, all scarred by repeated bombing. But production must continue. The war cannot be paused. And so the demand for forced labor increases. Neuengamme's subcamp network expands further in response. New satellite camps are established near damaged industrial sites. Prisoners are embedded directly into reconstruction efforts. Factories are repaired. Assembly lines restored. Concrete poured for new bunkers and shelters. The machinery of war refuses to stop. In shipyards operated by companies like Blohm and Voss, prisoners haul debris and resume construction of naval vessels, even as bomb craters remain visible nearby. Steel plates are lifted by skeletal arms. Sparks from welding torches shower onto thin uniforms. Above them, the sky remains unpredictable. Air raid sirens can sound at any moment. Sometimes prisoners are forced to continue working through bombing alerts. Guards prioritize production over safety. If bombs fall nearby, chaos erupts. Machinery halts. Dust clouds explode inward. Screams mix with the thunder of collapsing beams. In those moments, confusion offers brief opportunity. A prisoner may slip into a shadowed corner. A whispered exchange may occur without detection. But such moments are fleeting. Order returns quickly. As bombing raids continue through 1943 and into 1944, Hamburg becomes a city in ruins. Streets once crowded with civilians are scarred with rubble. Entire districts lie flattened. Prisoners from Neuengamme are deployed constantly for cleanup and reconstruction. They work in bombed-out neighborhoods, clearing pathways for military vehicles. They remove debris from factories so production can resume. They rebuild rail lines damaged by explosions. The physical toll is immense. Heavy lifting on minimal rations, exposure to toxic dust, and unstable structures. The constant risk of unexploded ordnance. The air smells of charred wood, burnt metal, and decay. Yet within this devastation, something subtle changes in the psychology of the prisoners. The illusion of invincibility surrounding the Reich begins to fracture. They see it in the broken skyline. They hear it in the frequency of bombers overhead. They feel it in the tension of guards whose confidence is no longer absolute. Hope grows cautiously, but hope is tempered by experience. The SS does not relax its grip. If anything, discipline tightens. Executions for sabotage increase. Public punishments become more severe. The regime understands that visible destruction could embolden resistance. So it reinforces control through fear. In the yards of subcamps, prisoners accused of slowing work are beaten in front of others. In some cases, men are hanged as warnings that bombing will not weaken authority. The smoke rising from the crematorium at Neuengamme blends with the smoke rising from bombed Hamburg. Two forms of destruction intertwining. The bombing campaign also accelerates the shift of production underground. To protect factories from air raids, German authorities move critical manufacturing into tunnels and fortified bunkers. Prisoners from Neuengamme are assigned to excavate these underground facilities. They dig through rock in suffocating darkness. The sound of pickaxes striking stone echoes endlessly. Dust coats their throats. Light is artificial and harsh. Day and night blur into one. Above ground, the city continues to burn. Below ground, the war continues in hidden chambers carved by captive hands. As 1944 progresses, the Allied air campaign intensifies across Germany. Hamburg remains a target. Each new raid forces prisoners to rebuild what was destroyed days earlier. The cycle is relentless. Bomb. Clear. Rebuild. Bomb again. In the barracks at night, men whisper about the firestorm. Some saw entire neighborhoods vanish. Others describe civilians running through streets engulfed in flame. A French prisoner says he saw the sky turn black with smoke even at noon. For many prisoners, the bombing represents a double-edged sword. It signals that the Reich is weakening, but it also increases their suffering. Food shortages worsen as infrastructure collapses. Transportation disruptions reduce supply deliveries. Rations shrink further. Hunger deepens. The guards grow more volatile. Bombing raids are stressful for them as well. Their families may be in cities under attack. Their homes threatened. Fear manifests as aggression. Beatings become more frequent. Tempers shorter. In one subcamp, after a factory section is damaged during a raid, prisoners are forced to work extended hours to restore production. No additional food is provided. Exhaustion becomes visible in every movement. Yet even amid the devastation, small acts of defiance persist. In the confusion following a bombing raid, a prisoner hides a damaged component that cannot be easily repaired. Another deliberately misaligns machinery during reconstruction. These gestures are risky but symbolic. The bombing campaign creates moments where control loosens briefly. In those gaps, resistance breathes. The children murdered at Bullenhuser Dam remain a silent undercurrent in these years. Their deaths occurred in the shadow of Allied advances. Their memory reinforces the knowledge that the regime will go to extreme lengths to conceal crimes. As the war's end approaches, bombing raids grow more frequent. Hamburg's skyline is permanently altered. Rubble piles replace streets. The Elbe reflects smoke instead of sunlight. Neuengamme remains operational amid the destruction. Prisoners continue to be marched into the city daily. The soundscape of their labor is punctuated by distant detonations and the hum of aircraft engines overhead. Some prisoners begin to believe liberation is inevitable. Others fear that in the chaos of collapse, the SS will choose annihilation over surrender. The bombing has changed the environment, but not yet the structure of power inside the camp. Roll calls still happen in freezing wind. Rations remain minimal. Executions still occur. The machinery of exploitation grinds on, even as the city around it crumbles. But the cumulative effect of Operation Gomorrah and subsequent air raids is undeniable. Hamburg is weakened. German industry is strained. The guards feel it. The prisoners see it. And as 1945 approaches, the bombing campaign merges with advancing ground forces to create a sense of impending rupture. The sky that once glowed with fire now glows with possibility. Because soon, the front lines will not just be heard in distant explosions. They will be felt on the roads leading away from Neuengamme. And when the order comes to evacuate, the devastation inflicted from the air will be replaced by chaos on the ground. The firestorm was only the beginning of the end. What follows will be even more desperate. The gates open before dawn, not to release anyone, to empty the camp. It is April 1945. The air is sharp with cold, but something else rides the wind now: urgency. Guards move faster than usual. Orders are barked without the slow, theatrical precision that once defined daily routine. Trucks rumble in and out. Papers burn in metal barrels near administrative buildings, smoke rising in frantic spirals. The machine is no longer expanding. It is retreating. British forces are advancing toward Hamburg. The Reich is collapsing on multiple fronts. Cities fall one by one. Inside Neuengamme, the SS understands that liberation is imminent, and they will not allow the prisoners to be found here. Roll call is chaotic. Prisoners are lined up in columns, not for work details, but for transport. Names are read, numbers checked against rapidly shrinking lists. Those too sick to stand are dragged forward. Others are left in barracks temporarily, their fate uncertain. The subcamp network begins to implode. Across northern Germany, orders are transmitted to evacuate satellite camps under Neuengamme's authority. Women from munitions plants, men from shipyards, prisoners from underground construction sites, all are to be moved northward. Where exactly? Few know. The phrase spreads quietly through the ranks. Death marches. Columns form outside the gates. Thousands of emaciated men and women step onto roads they have not walked freely in years. Guards with rifles flank the lines. Dogs bark. The sky hangs low and gray over marshland and fields. The first steps are slow. Bodies weakened by starvation and disease struggle to maintain pace. Some prisoners limp, supported by comrades. Others already sway with exhaustion. The order is simple. Keep moving. Anyone who falls behind risks immediate punishment. At first, the columns move through familiar territory, villages near Hamburg. Civilians watch from windows and doorways as skeletal figures shuffle past. Some stare. Some avert their eyes. A few throw scraps of bread toward the prisoners, quickly retreating before guards can react. The prisoners barely lift their heads. Energy must be conserved. The roads are muddy in places, frozen in others. Wooden clogs slip against uneven ground. Blisters form quickly. Blood-stained socks that have not been changed in months. The soundscape is relentless. Boots crunching gravel. Labored breathing. Occasional gunshots in the distance. The first bodies fall within hours. A Soviet prisoner collapses by the roadside, unable to rise. A guard shouts, kicks him. No response. A shot cracks the air. The column continues walking. There is no ceremony. The march stretches for kilometers. Some columns are directed toward Lübeck, others toward ports along the Baltic Sea. The exact destination is unclear, even to the guards in some cases. Orders from higher command are rushed and contradictory. What is clear is this: the prisoners must not be liberated in Neuengamme. Back at the camp, those too sick to march are left behind temporarily. Some die in barracks as the columns disappear into the countryside. Others are transferred in separate transports. The crematorium operates one last time as evidence is destroyed. Smoke rises against a sky heavy with the weight of collapse. On the roads, conditions deteriorate quickly. Food is scarce. Guards distribute minimal rations, a crust of bread, sometimes nothing. Water is drawn from ditches or handed out in limited quantities. Prisoners attempt to support one another. A French resistance fighter helps a Dutch inmate steady himself over rough ground. A Polish prisoner whispers encouragement to a Danish woman stumbling beside him. Solidarity becomes survival. But solidarity has limits when bodies are failing. At night, the columns are herded into fields, barns, or makeshift enclosures. Guards encircle them with rifles. There are no proper shelters. Prisoners lie on cold earth, huddled together for warmth. Sleep is fragmented by fear. Some whisper about the approaching British. Others fear that the guards will execute them en masse before surrendering. Gunshots echo occasionally in darkness. Morning comes without relief. The march resumes. In some areas, rail transport replaces walking. Prisoners are crammed into freight cars, overcrowded, poorly ventilated, reminiscent of earlier deportations. The smell inside is suffocating. Bodies press against one another. Some suffocate before the train reaches its destination. The chaos of late-war Germany complicates movement. Bomb-damaged rail lines cause delays. Columns are rerouted unpredictably. Guards argue among themselves about orders. Rumors swirl that high-ranking officials are fleeing northward. The prisoners are caught in the center of a collapsing system. Those who falter during marches face immediate consequences. A Belgian prisoner stumbles and falls. A guard raises his rifle. The shot is quick. The body is left behind on the roadside. The column moves on. Witnessing such deaths becomes almost routine. Shock gives way to numb endurance. The women evacuated from subcamps face similar brutality. Their columns are smaller, but no less desperate. Some are forced to march for days without adequate food. Others are transported in open trucks, exposed to cold winds sweeping in from the coast. Pregnant women struggle silently. Older prisoners fall more quickly. The guards show little distinction. The war outside intensifies. Allied aircraft patrol overhead. Occasionally they spot columns moving along roads and mistake them for retreating military units. Strafing runs occur in some regions, adding confusion and terror to already chaotic marches. Prisoners dive for cover instinctively, even as guards shout orders to remain upright. The sky that once signaled hope now carries danger. As the columns move closer to the Baltic coast, a pattern emerges. They are being directed toward ports. Lübeck, Neustadt, other coastal towns. Ships wait offshore. The prisoners do not know why. Some whisper that they will be transported to camps further north. Others fear they will be sunk at sea to eliminate witnesses. The uncertainty gnaws at them. In fields near Lübeck, thousands of prisoners from Neuengamme and its subcamps gather under guard. The ground is trampled into mud by exhausted feet. Bodies lie scattered where men and women have collapsed. The smell of unwashed flesh and sickness hangs heavy. Guards appear increasingly disorganized. Some burn documents in small fires. Others remove insignia from uniforms. The sense of imminent surrender hangs in the air, but no formal order has arrived. The prisoners are herded toward docks. Ships loom in the distance. Large passenger liners and cargo vessels. Their silhouettes rise against the gray Baltic sky. The prisoners hesitate. They have heard rumors of atrocities committed elsewhere in the war. The idea of being loaded onto ships in these final days feels ominous. But they have no choice. Gangplanks creak under the weight of skeletal bodies. Inside the holds, conditions are suffocating. Thousands are packed tightly into confined spaces below deck. There is little ventilation. Food is scarce. Water limited. The air grows hot and stale quickly. Some prisoners cling to the belief that this is a transfer to Sweden or another neutral country. Others sense something darker. Back on land, additional columns continue arriving at coastal assembly points. The roads behind them are littered with unmarked graves, bodies left where they fell. Neuengamme itself is nearly empty now. British forces approaching the area will soon find a camp stripped of its prisoners. Barracks standing silent. Administrative buildings hastily cleared. Evidence partially destroyed. The dramatic liberation scene that defined other camps will not occur here, because the prisoners are no longer inside the fences. They are scattered across roads and sea. Inside the holds of ships anchored in the Baltic, the atmosphere grows desperate. Men and women cough in cramped darkness. The smell of fear and sickness intensifies. Some pray. Others sit silently, conserving strength. The guards stationed on deck are tense. Orders are unclear. The war is almost over. Berlin is surrounded. And yet, here in the Baltic, thousands of prisoners from Neuengamme are trapped on vessels with uncertain purpose. The marches have ended, but the ordeal is far from over. Because the sea does not promise safety. And what will happen next will become one of the deadliest maritime disasters in history. The machine that began with bricks and forced labor has carried its victims to the water's edge. And it is about to make one final, catastrophic move. The water is calm. Too calm. It is early May 1945. The Baltic Sea stretches out in a flat gray sheet beneath a pale sky. In the distance, the silhouettes of large ships sit motionless off the coast near Neustadt. They look almost peaceful, their hulls steady against the gentle movement of the tide. But inside those ships, thousands of prisoners from Neuengamme are packed into darkness. The holds are suffocating. Air is thick with sweat, sickness, and fear. Bodies pressed shoulder to shoulder, rib cages protruding beneath striped uniforms that hang like loose fabric over bone. Many have just survived death marches from the collapsing subcamps. They are weak, dehydrated, and uncertain of why they have been brought here. Some believe they are being transported to safety. Others suspect something far worse. Among the vessels anchored in the Baltic is the once luxurious ocean liner Cap Arcona. Built as a cruise ship in the late 1920s, it once carried wealthy passengers across seas in comfort. Now it holds thousands of concentration camp prisoners below deck, crammed into spaces never meant for such human density. Another vessel nearby, the Thielbeck, is similarly loaded. No one in the holds can see the full picture. They only know the darkness. The air grows hotter as hours pass. Ventilation is minimal. Water is scarce. Guards stationed above deck provide little information. Some prisoners press their faces towards small openings, gasping for any breeze that might drift downward. Whispers circulate in the gloom. They will scuttle the ships. They will take us to Sweden. They will sink us to erase evidence. The uncertainty gnaws at already frayed nerves. On land, British forces are advancing rapidly toward the coast. Germany's surrender is imminent. Berlin has fallen. Adolf Hitler is dead. The Reich is finished. And yet, here in the Baltic, thousands of prisoners remain trapped between land and sea. The SS officers responsible for these transports operate under murky directives. Some believe they are moving prisoners away from advancing Allied troops to prevent liberation scenes that would expose the full scale of camp atrocities. Others may intend to use the ships as bargaining tools. Documentation is sparse, orders fragmented. But what happens next is shaped not by SS intent alone. On May 3, 1945, British aircraft patrol the Baltic coastline. Intelligence reports indicate that German officials may be attempting to flee by sea. Large ships in the harbor are viewed as potential evacuation vessels for high-ranking Nazis or military personnel. From the air, the Cap Arcona and nearby ships appear as legitimate military targets. The prisoners below deck have no way of knowing this. They hear only the distant hum at first, a faint vibration in the air. Some recognize the sound immediately. Aircraft engines. The hum grows louder. Guards on deck scramble. Some shout orders. Others peer skyward, scanning for incoming planes. Inside the holds, prisoners shift uneasily. The air feels charged. Then the first explosion hits. The blast reverberates through the ship's hull like a thunderclap trapped inside metal walls. Men are thrown against one another. Dust and debris fall from overhead. Screams erupt in darkness. Another explosion follows. And another. British aircraft, unaware that the ships are filled with concentration camp prisoners, unleash rockets and bombs against what they believe are enemy vessels. Fire ignites on deck. Smoke begins to seep downward into the holds. Panic spreads instantly. Prisoners surge towards stairwells and ladders, desperate for air. Guards block some exits, unsure of orders. Flames lick through corridors. The smell of burning fuel mixes with the stench of human bodies trapped below. The Cap Arcona begins to burn. Above deck, chaos reigns. Some guards attempt to lower lifeboats. Others abandon posts entirely. A few prisoners manage to reach open air, coughing violently as smoke engulfs the superstructure. The sea that moments ago appeared calm now reflects orange flames and black smoke. Below deck, conditions become unbearable. Heat intensifies rapidly. Smoke thickens. Men collapse where they stand. Some claw at metal walls in desperation. Others trample one another in blind attempts to escape. A French prisoner reaches the deck, just as another rocket strikes nearby. He sees the horizon, the open sea, freedom within sight, and realizes the ship is doomed. Flames spread uncontrollably. The hull lists slightly. Prisoners leap overboard. The water is shockingly cold. Bodies hit the surface in chaotic succession. Some attempt to swim toward shore, though many are too weak. Others cling to floating debris. Smoke fills their lungs. Panic consumes, and from the air, pilots observe burning ships and figures in the water. Some believe they are targeting enemy troops attempting escape. The full horror is not yet understood. The Cap Arcona's fire intensifies. The once elegant liner becomes a floating inferno. As the hull burns, ammunition stored aboard detonates sporadically. Debris rains into the sea. Screams carry across water, then fade. Nearby, the Thielbeck is also struck. It sinks rapidly. Thousands of prisoners are trapped below deck as water floods in. The weight of bodies, the disorientation in darkness, the speed of sinking. It is catastrophic. Those who manage to reach the surface face new dangers. Cold shock seizes muscles. The Baltic in early May remains frigid. Prisoners already weakened by starvation cannot sustain long swims. Some cling to wreckage briefly before slipping beneath waves. Local fishing boats and rescue craft respond hesitantly. Some civilians attempt to help survivors. Others fear approaching the burning ships. Guards who escaped on lifeboats sometimes fire at prisoners struggling in water, determined to prevent escape even in these final moments of the war. By the time flames subside and ships sink or burn out, the scale of loss is staggering. Approximately 7,000 prisoners from Neuengamme and its subcamps perish in the waters of the Baltic that day. It is one of the deadliest maritime disasters in history, and it happens just days before Germany's official surrender. On shore, the smoke from the Cap Arcona lingers against the gray sky. Debris washes up along beaches. Bodies drift toward coastline. British forces entering the region soon encounter scenes of unimaginable devastation. Charred hulls, floating corpses, survivors shivering in shock. The realization dawns slowly. The ships did not carry fleeing Nazi officials. They carried concentration camp prisoners. The horror compounds itself. Survivors who make it ashore are skeletal, wrapped in wet striped uniforms, eyes hollow from exhaustion and trauma. Some collapse immediately. Others stagger forward, unable to fully comprehend that the war is ending even as so many around them have died. For Neuengamme, the Cap Arcona disaster becomes its final mass tragedy. The death marches had already claimed countless lives along roads from Hamburg to the coast. Now the sea has taken thousands more. Back at the main camp, British forces arrive to find it largely empty. No dramatic liberation scene unfolds at Neuengamme itself. The prisoners who might have greeted liberators with hollow smiles are gone, scattered across fields, rail cars, and the Baltic Sea. The machinery of exploitation that began with bricks and forced labor has culminated not in orderly surrender, but in chaos and fire. In the days following the disaster, efforts are made to recover bodies from the water. Corpses are buried in mass graves along the coast. The scale of identification is limited. Many remain unnamed. Families across Europe will not learn for months, sometimes years, how their loved ones died. The Cap Arcona, once a symbol of leisure and privilege, now lies as a burned-out wreck, a floating tomb. The survivors carry memories that defy language. The roar of aircraft engines, the heat of flames on skin, the icy shock of Baltic water, the sight of comrades disappearing beneath waves just days before liberation. For some, survival feels accidental. For others, unbearable. The war ends formally on May 8th, 1945. Celebrations erupt across Europe. But along the Baltic coast, silence settles heavily. Neuengamme's story does not conclude with liberation gates thrown open. It ends with smoke rising from ships and bodies washing ashore. And yet, even in this catastrophic final act, questions linger. Who gave the orders to move prisoners onto those ships? Why were they left anchored offshore? Could the disaster have been prevented? The answers are fragmented, buried within collapsing administrative records and the confusion of war's final days. What remains undeniable is the human cost. 7,000 lives extinguished in fire and water. The machine that began with forced labor in a brickworks has consumed tens of thousands across years. Now it has consumed thousands more in a single day. But even in catastrophe, survivors remain. And their testimony will soon begin to reshape the narrative of what happened inside Neuengamme. Because the war may be over, but accountability has not yet begun. The first British soldiers step through the gates and find silence. No crowds of skeletal prisoners rush forward. No chaotic scenes of liberation unfold in the yard. Instead, they find empty barracks, abandoned guard towers, and the faint smell of smoke lingering in the air. Papers lie half-burned in administrative offices. Files are scattered across desks, as if someone had left in a hurry. The fences still stand. The watchtowers still cast long shadows over the compound. But the prisoners are gone. It is May 1945. Germany has surrendered. The war in Europe is over. Allied forces move methodically through northern territories, securing infrastructure, disarming remnants of the Wehrmacht, and investigating concentration camps. When British troops reach Neuengamme, they are confronted not with liberation, but with aftermath. The camp has been evacuated days earlier. Most of its prisoners forced onto death marches or loaded onto ships in the Baltic. Ships like the Cap Arcona, whose burning wreckage now lies off the coast. Inside Neuengamme, the evidence of what occurred is partial and chaotic. Barracks remain overcrowded with discarded straw mattresses and broken wooden bunks. Latrine pits overflow. The infirmary contains traces of illness, bandages, stained cloth, remnants of makeshift medical care. The crematorium stands quiet. Ash settles undisturbed. British soldiers walk through the compound cautiously. Some have heard rumors of camp conditions elsewhere, Bergen-Belsen, Buchenwald, Dachau, but Neuengamme presents a different scene. It is a void left by hurried retreat. And yet, the absence speaks loudly. Investigators begin documenting what they find. Photographs are taken of empty barracks and abandoned guard posts. Records partially destroyed are gathered and pieced together. Testimony from local civilians is collected. Soon, survivors from death marches and ship disasters begin to surface. Men and women rescued from the Baltic coast describe the inferno aboard the Cap Arcona and the Thielbeck. Others recount days of marching through mud and fields, comrades shot for falling behind. Slowly, the shape of Neuengamme's final weeks emerges. The British authorities move quickly to detain camp personnel who have not fled. Some SS guards are captured in surrounding areas. Others attempt to blend into civilian populations, discarding uniforms and insignia. A few succeed temporarily, but accountability begins almost immediately. Neuengamme becomes part of a broader investigative effort into crimes committed within the concentration camp system. British military tribunals are established to prosecute those responsible for atrocities in camps under their jurisdiction. In the months following liberation, former prisoners return to provide testimony. French resistance members describe forced labor in Hamburg shipyards, working for companies like Blohm and Voss. Danish detainees recount starvation in subcamps scattered across northern Germany. Jewish survivors speak of medical experiments conducted by SS doctors. The children murdered at Bullenhuser Dam are not forgotten. Investigations reveal the details of their transport from Auschwitz concentration camp, their infection with tuberculosis, and their execution in a Hamburg basement. The horror of their deaths reverberates across Europe. The British authorities gather evidence meticulously. Documents recovered from administrative offices are translated. Transport lists are cross-referenced with survivor accounts. Mass graves along the Baltic coast are examined. The scale of Neuengamme's operation becomes clearer. More than 100,000 prisoners passed through its gates and subcamps between 1938 and 1945. Tens of thousands perished through forced labor, starvation, disease, execution, death marches, and maritime catastrophe. The network of more than 80 subcamps demonstrates the integration of forced labor into German industry. Factories and shipyards depended on captive bodies. Civilian companies benefited from exploitation. Accountability must extend beyond individual guards. In 1945 and 1946, the Neuengamme trials begin under British authority. SS officers, guards, and administrative personnel are brought before military courts. Some appear defiant. Others claim ignorance or obedience to orders. Testimony from survivors confronts them directly. Witnesses describe public hangings in the yard, beatings during roll call, the relentless hunger, the smoke from the crematorium, the chaos of evacuation. One by one, the defendants' rolls are examined. Some are sentenced to death. Others receive prison terms. But many perpetrators evade capture in the immediate post-war years. Chaos and displacement across Germany complicate investigations. Some former SS personnel manage to integrate quietly into post-war society, at least temporarily. The process of justice is uneven and incomplete. Meanwhile, the physical site of Neuengamme undergoes transformation. In the immediate aftermath of the war, the British used the camp as an internment facility for former Nazi officials and suspected war criminals. The irony is stark. The same barracks that once held prisoners now house those associated with the regime. Later, the site is repurposed again. In the 1950s, much of Neuengamme becomes a prison under West German authority. Barracks are demolished. New buildings rise. For years, the history of the concentration camp remains partially obscured by its post-war use. Memory competes with reconstruction. Survivors advocate for recognition. French and Danish former prisoners organize commemorations. Jewish organizations demand acknowledgement of the crimes committed there. Families of those lost aboard the Cap Arcona seek answers. The political climate of post-war Germany complicates these efforts. In the early Cold War years, attention shifts toward rebuilding and geopolitical tension between East and West. Public reckoning with the full scope of camp atrocities unfolds gradually. Still, the evidence cannot be erased. Testimony collected during the Neuengamme trial circulates. Survivors publish memoirs. Journalists document the Cap Arcona disaster, revealing that thousands died days before the war's end. The narrative of Neuengamme becomes part of a broader understanding of the concentration camp system, not as isolated horror, but as a coordinated network deeply intertwined with German industry and administration. In the 1960s and beyond, renewed investigations pursue individuals who had escaped earlier prosecution. SS Dr. Kurt Heismeyer, responsible for medical experiments on prisoners and the infection of children with tuberculosis, is eventually arrested and tried in East Germany. His prosecution decades later underscores the persistence of memory. The children of Bullenhuser Dam are identified by name. Memorial plaques are installed in the basement where they were murdered. The site becomes a place of quiet remembrance. Back at Neuengamme, calls for a proper memorial intensify. Former prisoners visit the site, sometimes confronting the dissonance of seeing prison buildings where barracks once stood. They recount to younger generations what happened on that ground. Gradually, public consciousness shifts. By the 1980s and 1990s, the importance of preserving Neuengamme as a memorial site gains official recognition. Prison facilities are relocated. Remaining structures are restored or reconstructed for educational purposes. Exhibitions are created. Names of victims are compiled. The vast subcamp network is documented in detail, mapping how forced labor extended across northern Germany. Today, the site stands not as a functioning prison, but as a memorial and documentation center. Visitors walk through former barracks. They stand in the yard where roll calls lasted hours in freezing wind. They see the crematorium, silent now. They read about the Cap Arcona disaster and the death marches that emptied the camp in its final days. They learn about the women forced into munitions plants, the men digging tunnels beneath bombed cities, the children murdered in a school basement. But in May 1945, when British soldiers first entered Neuengamme, none of this was yet institutionalized memory. It was raw aftermath. Ash in the crematorium, scattered papers in offices, empty bunks, and survivors emerging slowly from fields and shores, carrying stories that would define the camp's legacy. The story of Neuengamme does not conclude with gates thrown open. It unfolds through testimony, investigation, and remembrance. The physical machinery of exploitation has been dismantled, but the moral reckoning continues. Because what happened here, from brickworks to subcamps, from firestorms to death marches, from ships ablaze on the Baltic to quiet trials in British courts, cannot be confined to a single chapter of war. It echoes forward, and as the last embers of the Cap Arcona disaster cool, and the last documents are filed in military tribunals, a new phase begins. Not of suffering, but of memory. And memory, unlike barbed wire, at first, there is nothing but wind moving across open ground. No shouting guards, no roll call whistles, no smoke rising from the crematorium, just silence. Grass grows where thousands once stood for hours in freezing rain. Birds settle on fence posts that once carried electric current. The brick buildings remain, but they no longer echo with boots or commands. They stand still, heavy with memory. After the war, Neuengamme does not immediately become a memorial. It becomes something else. In the chaotic months following Germany's surrender, British authorities used the former camp as an interment site for members of the SS and other Nazi officials. The irony is sharp. Those once guarding the fences now find themselves confined behind them. Barracks that held starving prisoners now contain men accused of overseeing forced labor, executions, and death marches. But this phase is temporary. As the British military administration transitions authority to West German control, Neuengamme changes again. In the early 1950s, the site is converted into a regular prison. New buildings rise. Walls are reinforced. Administrative structures are renovated. The original camp begins to disappear under layers of post-war necessity. For survivors, this transformation is painful. Men and women who endured starvation and brutality, they return years later and find parts of the camp altered or demolished. Some barracks are gone. Sections of the grounds are inaccessible. The site where they witnessed executions or lost comrades now serves bureaucratic functions unrelated to its past. Memory feels displaced. Across Europe, former prisoners form associations. French resistance survivors organize commemorative ceremonies. Danish former detainees lobby for recognition. Jewish communities seek acknowledgement of the children murdered at Bullenhuser Dam and the thousands lost in the Baltic Sea. They refuse to let Neuengamme fade into administrative obscurity. In the decades after the war, Germany undergoes a slow and uneven confrontation with its past. In the immediate post-war years, survival and reconstruction dominate national attention. The Cold War reshapes priorities. Many former Nazis reintegrate into civilian life quietly. But the memories carried by survivors do not disappear. Testimonies circulate. Books are published. School children begin to learn about concentration camps not as distant rumors, but as documented systems of exploitation and murder. Neuengamme gradually re-enters public consciousness. The scale of its operations becomes clearer over time. More than 100,000 prisoners pass through its gates and its network of over 80 subcamps. Tens of thousands died from forced labor, starvation, disease, executions, death marches, and the catastrophe aboard the Cap Arcona. Yet, unlike camps liberated in dramatic fashion, where Allied cameras captured skeletal survivors at the moment of rescue, Neuengamme's story lacks a singular, defining image of liberation. Its final chapter unfolded on roads and at sea. This absence makes remembrance more complicated. There are no iconic photographs of prisoners flooding out of Neuengamme's gates. Instead, there are images of empty barracks, burned documents, and wrecked ships off the Baltic coast. The responsibility to preserve memory falls heavily on survivors. In the 1960s and 70s, commemorative efforts intensify. Former prisoners return to the site for annual gatherings. They stand together in silence where roll calls once lasted for hours. They recount stories to younger generations. The basement at Bullenhuser Dam, where 20 children were murdered after medical experimentation, becomes a focal point of remembrance. The names of those children are recovered, researched, and engraved on plaques. They are no longer anonymous. Each name is spoken aloud during ceremonies. The transformation of Neuengamme into a formal memorial site is gradual and hard-fought. For years, the continued use of the grounds as a prison limits access. Survivors protest. Advocacy groups push for change. They argue that a place where so many suffered cannot be reduced to ordinary function. Finally, in the 1980s and beyond, significant shifts occur. Portions of the prison complex are relocated. Remaining historical structures are preserved. The site begins evolving into what it is today, a memorial and documentation center dedicated to education and remembrance. Visitors now walk through restored buildings. They see the brickworks where it all began in 1938, when the first 100 prisoners arrived under the authority of Heinrich Himmler's expanding concentration camp system. They stand in the yard where public executions reinforce terror. They enter the former infirmary and learn about medical experiments conducted by SS doctors. Exhibitions detail the vast subcamp network that fed labor into Hamburg's war industry. Shipyards such as Blohm and Voss, munitions plants, and underground production facilities. Maps illustrate how prisoners were dispersed across northern Germany, embedded directly into the machinery of war. Panels recount the firestorm of Operation Gemara and the forced labor that followed. Photographs and testimonies document the death marches and the final maritime disaster in the Baltic. The memorial does not sensationalize. It presents evidence. It invites reflection. And it confronts visitors with an uncomfortable truth. Neuengamme was not an isolated aberration. It was integrated into the economic and administrative fabric of the Reich. Civilian industries benefited. Local communities observed columns of prisoners marching through streets. Bureaucrats processed transport lists with mechanical efficiency. Memory, in this context, becomes not only an act of mourning, but an act of accountability. Survivors who once stood in freezing roll calls now stand before audiences, recounting details that are difficult to hear. The smell of smoke from the crematorium, the weight of bricks carried under guard, the sight of comrades collapsing on death marches. Their voices tremble, but they speak, because silence would be another erasure. The landscape of Neuengamme today carries layers of time. Grass covers what was once mud churned by thousands of boots. Trees line pathways where prisoners once marched under rifle watch. The brick buildings cast long shadows that stretch into quiet afternoons. But beneath that calm surface lies history that cannot be undone. The memory of women assembling munitions in suffocating factories, of men digging tunnels beneath bombed cities, of children infected deliberately with disease and hanged in a school basement, of thousands burned and drowned aboard ships days before liberation. As decades pass, a new challenge emerges. The number of living survivors declines. The responsibility to remember shifts to historians, educators, and younger generations. Exhibitions expand. Digital archives are created. Names of victims are compiled meticulously. Researchers trace family histories to reconnect descendants with stories long buried. Commemoration ceremonies continue annually. Candles are lit in the yard. Wreaths are placed near memorial plaques. Silence is observed where once there was shouting and gunfire. International delegations visit. School groups walk through the grounds, guided by educators who explain that what happened here was not inevitable. It was the result of choices, ideological, political, economic, made by individuals and institutions. The memory of Neuengamme now functions as warning as well as remembrance. It stands as evidence of how ordinary industrial ambition, the production of bricks for a Führer city, can evolve into a system of mass exploitation and death. It demonstrates how war intensifies cruelty, how fear and propaganda enable dehumanization, how bureaucracy can facilitate atrocity with chilling efficiency. Yet remembrance is not static. It requires constant engagement. In recent decades, efforts have been made to document not only the experiences of prisoners, but also the involvement of local communities and industries. Archival research uncovers contracts, correspondence, and production reports linking civilian enterprises to forced labor. The narrative broadens. Neuengamme is understood not only as a place of suffering, but as a node within a larger network of complicity. Visitors today may stand in the quiet yard and struggle to imagine the noise that once filled it, the barking of dogs, the crack of rifle fire, the murmured prayers of prisoners waiting through endless counts. They may see only grass and brick, but guided by testimony and documentation, they begin to sense the layers beneath. Memory transforms space. The silence is no longer empty. It is heavy, and it carries responsibility. For those who survived, the transformation of Neuengamme into a memorial is both solace and burden. Solace, because their suffering is acknowledged. Burden, because memory can never restore what was lost. Families torn apart, children murdered, lives cut short in fire and water. As the 20th century gives way to the 21st, Neuengamme stands not as a relic, but as a living site of education. Its exhibitions evolve. Its archives expand. Its grounds host dialogues about human rights, extremism, and the fragility of democratic institutions. The story that began with a brickworks in 1938 now informs conversations about the present. Because the question lingers, how does a society allow such a system to take root? The wind still moves across open ground, but now it carries voices. Voices of prisoners who refuse to let their suffering be forgotten. Voices of historians who piece together fragmented records. Voices of visitors who leave the grounds changed, unsettled, more aware. Neuengamme is no longer a site of forced labor. It is a site of conscience. And yet, one final question remains. When a last survivor's voice fades, will memory endure with the same urgency? That answer belongs not to the past, but to the generations who walk these grounds next. Stand in the yard long enough, and you begin to hear what is no longer there. No boots on gravel, no shouted numbers, no dogs straining at leashes, just wind. It moves across the open space where thousands once stood for hours in rain and frost, where men were hanged as warnings, where smoke drifted from a crematorium that worked without pause. The bricks are still here. The earth is still here. The sky above Neuengamme is the same sky that watched everything unfold. But the people are gone. From the first 100 prisoners forced to shape clay into bricks in 1938, to the tens of thousands scattered across more than 80 subcamps, to the skeletal columns driven north in April 1945, to the 7,000 who drowned or burned in the Baltic aboard the Cap Arcona. The human presence that defined this place has passed into history. And yet, it has not vanished. Because Neuengamme was never only about fences and barracks. It was about a system. It began with ambition, the vision of transforming Hamburg into a grand Führer city. It required bricks. Bricks required labor. Labor required bodies. And those bodies were supplied by a regime that had already redefined who counted as human. Under the authority of Heinrich Himmler and the expanding SS apparatus, the camp that began as a satellite of Sachsenhausen became an independent center of exploitation. What started as an economic project grew into a sprawling network of coercion. The machinery was methodical. Arrests, transports, registration, forced labor. Brickworks turned into shipyards. Shipyards into munitions plants. Surface factories into underground tunnels. The network expanded outward, embedding prisoners directly into the industrial bloodstream of the Reich. Civilian companies signed contracts. Administrators filed paperwork. Guards enforced discipline. And the prisoners carried the weight, literally and figuratively, of a war machine that consumed them. Neuengamme was not designed as an extermination camp in the same way as Auschwitz-Birkenau. It did not have gas chambers as its primary instrument. And yet, tens of thousands died within its system. Starvation was a weapon. Exhaustion was a weapon. Disease was a weapon. Execution was a weapon. And in the final days, fire and water became weapons too. The children murdered in the basement of Bullenhuser Dam represent perhaps the starkest illustration of how ideology corrodes conscience. They were not soldiers, not saboteurs, not resistance fighters. They were children, infected deliberately for medical experimentation by SS Dr. Kurt Heismeyer and hanged to eliminate evidence as British troops advanced. That act alone should have shattered any illusion of moral boundary. But Neuengamme did not rely on one dramatic horror. Its cruelty was cumulative. It was the endless roll calls and freezing wind. The watery soup rationed with mathematical indifference. The coughs echoing through barracks as typhus spread unchecked. The public hangings staged to suppress resistance. The women assembling munitions under suffocating factory lights. The men digging tunnels beneath bombed cities after Operation Gomorrah reduced neighborhoods to ash. The death marches that turned roads into graveyards. And finally, the ships burning on the Baltic just days before peace. Neuengamme's story is not a single explosion of violence. It is a slow, grinding erosion of human dignity. That is what makes it so chilling, because it demonstrates how atrocity can become routine, how bureaucracy can sanitize cruelty, how economic ambition can rationalize exploitation. The men and women who passed through Neuengamme came from across Europe, Poland, France, the Netherlands, Denmark, the Soviet Union, Germany itself. Political prisoners stood beside Jews, resistance fighters besides. The diversity of its victims reveals the breadth of the regime's persecution. But it also reveals something else: solidarity. In whispered translations during roll call, in shared scraps of bread, in hands gripping each other during death marches, in quiet acts of sabotage inside factories. The system sought to isolate and dehumanize. Yet prisoners created fragments of community within its grip. After the war, justice arrived imperfectly. Some guards and officials were tried in British military tribunals. Some were executed, others imprisoned. Many escaped accountability for years, even decades. The transformation of Neuengamme into a memorial was neither immediate nor simple. For years, the site functioned as a prison, its past partially obscured. Survivors had to fight for recognition. Memory had to be reclaimed. Today, when visitors walk the grounds, they encounter exhibitions detailing the subcamp network, the industrial partnerships, the medical crimes, the death marches, and the maritime disaster. They see names, thousands of names, each one representing a life interrupted. But numbers alone cannot convey the weight of what occurred here. What truly endures is testimony. A French prisoner describing the smell of burning flesh from the crematorium. A Danish survivor recalling the shock of Baltic water after leaping from a burning ship. A Jewish child's name spoken aloud in the basement where she was killed. Testimony resists erasure. It forces confrontation. Neuengamme compels us to examine uncomfortable truths. That ordinary industries benefited from forced labor. That local populations observed columns of prisoners marching through streets. That obedience to authority, when detached from moral responsibility, becomes lethal. It also compels reflection on fragility. The regime that built Neuengamme presented itself as strong, inevitable, destined for a 1,000-year future. Within 12 years, it lay in ruins. Its cities bombed. Its leaders dead or on trial. Its grand architectural visions reduced to rubble. The bricks molded by prisoners for a Führer city did not create an eternal empire. They stand instead as silent witnesses to its crimes. In the final analysis, Neuengamme teaches not only about the past, but about warning signs. The language that dehumanizes. The policies that exclude. The normalization of violence against designated others. The transformation of economic goals into moral justifications. It is easy to view concentration camps as aberrations, disconnected from ordinary life. Neuengamme challenges that comfort, because it was deeply connected to ordinary life, to factories and contracts, to municipal planning, to bureaucratic paperwork, to civilian observation. Its horror did not exist in isolation. As the last chapter of this story closes, the wind still moves across open ground. Grass covers what was once mud churned by thousands of desperate feet. The crematorium no longer smokes. The gates no longer confine. But the responsibility remains. To remember that this began not with fire and drowning, but with policy and prejudice. Not with chaos, but with organization. Not with sudden collapse, but with gradual normalization. The darkest camps are not only those that kill. They are those that operate efficiently, quietly, with paperwork and contracts and signatures. Neuengamme was such a place, and its legacy now belongs to all who study it. The question that lingers is not how such a system ended. We know how it ended, in defeat, in fire, in water, in trial. The question is how it began, and whether the early signs, the language, the exclusion, the incremental erosion of rights, would be recognized if they appeared again. History does not repeat itself in identical form, but it echoes. Stand in the yard long enough, and you will hear those echoes, not as screams, not as explosions, but as a quiet insistence that memory matters, that vigilance matters, that dignity must never again be made conditional. Neuengamme is no longer a camp. It is a warning, and warnings, if ignored, have consequences. The gates are open now. The fence is silent.